And a pleasant good afternoon to everyone out there in Irish Breakdown land. I am Vince D'Addario. I'm the football analyst here at irishbreakdown.com. And with me, as always, is Brian Driscoll. He is the publisher at irishbreakdown.com. And as you can tell, and I'll just throw it out there, there are very few good things that come from your daughter throwing up in the middle of the night. But one of them is I get to do this from home.
Yeah, get to do the green background.
And I get to have my IB merch on, which is always a good thing. So,
which makes up for you. See, it's funny. We used to not be able to do shows on days where like snow days because you had one mic and it was at school. Now you got two mics, but now your one flag is at school.
I know, right? I know.
You're becoming very expensive, Vince. You're becoming a very expensive employee. I got to have you furnished for like 2 different studios.
2 different sites.
Killing me. But you're worth it.
I know,
man.
right?
You're worth it.
Hey, yeah, that's what I like to hear. But so today, Brian, we are going to continue our position preview. Spring practice we know starts tomorrow.
It's a big one.
So we are on the clock. It is spring practice eve, and I'm excited about it, frankly. But one of the positions that I'm really excited to see, because there are a lot of question marks, is the cornerback position, and there are a ton of question marks at corner. I mean, this is a big year for corner. There is no question about that.
Yeah. Look, it is. I mean, we've seen cornerback play at Notre Dame has been really up and down for years. I mean, there's been years where they've had great corner tandems and years where the corner play was like okay, and then years where the corner play was bad. I mean, wasn't that long ago. Last night we had Troy Pride on the show. Wasn't that long ago, 2018, that Notre Dame had one of the 4 or 5 best corner tandems in the entire country, in all of college football.
Right.
2019 it was okay because Troy was good, but the other side wasn't great. 2020 it was okay. Last year it was okay. 2015 it was excellent when you had Cole Luke and you had Kavari Russell, right? There's been some years where it's been really good, and then years where it just hasn't been good. And Notre Dame's got to get better there. I mean, Brian Smith has talked about this a lot. You look at the teams winning titles, and they usually tend to have, pretty good corners. Even if they don't have great defenses, they have pretty good corners. And you look at the Clemson team that beat Notre Dame in 2018. Yes, Notre Dame had one of the 5 best corner tams in the country, but so did Clemson with Trayvon Mullen and A.J. Terrell. So Notre Dame's got to get better there. It's a recruiting thing. It's a development thing. It's all of those things. But what we can say is the corner play has to get better, because what we saw last year was Notre Dame's cornerback position group is good enough to where most teams can't beat them, right? I mean, so it's not like they're terrible, they're bad, they're awful. Clarence Lewis is better than who he's going up against 8 games a year, right? For the most part, right?
Absolutely.
And, Cam Hart's inexperience didn't hurt him last year against, 8 opponents, right? Maybe more. But again, the standard for which we evaluate success and is this group good is, can they go do it against the best teams on the schedule?
Right.
And at times last year, the entire cornerback depth chart struggled. At other times, like North Carolina was an example, I thought the corners just did not play. It's probably, as a unit, their worst game of the year. Cam had some mistakes. Clarence had some mistakes. Tariq Bracey had mistakes. You saw Ramon Henderson get beat. He was still at corner at the time. He got beat on that double move, remember? And they threw like a pump fake and threw it over his head.
I remember. Yeah.
And it was just a bad group. And then you had games like Wisconsin where Cam played really good and Tariq had a solid game, but Clarence struggled. And then Cincinnati, Clarence had a rough game. And then also Cam had a couple issues at times. And then, of course, the Oklahoma State game, Tariq and Clarence both had rough performances. So the reality is the group has to get better. The good news is everybody comes back. They didn't lose anybody from the cornerback room from last year. So you at least know, like, you have some, you know what the baseline is, right? Like, we know the baseline is corners are good enough to go 11-2, right? And but now it's, is that 11-2 going to be to the 2 best teams that you play?
Right.
And that's the question, because you're not going to beat Clemson. You're not going to beat Ohio State if your cornerback room doesn't get better. And it has to be everybody. It can't just be Cam Hart emerges as a star and then the other side doesn't, because what we'll see what happened in 2019 at times and in past years, last year even, where after a while teams were like, okay, number 5 is pretty good. We're just not going to. And after the Wisconsin game, there went a few weeks where the teams were just like, I'm not going to throw with that guy. But they didn't have to. Like, if you can avoid one guy if the other guys aren't playing well. What made that 2018 team so good is if you wanted to avoid Julian Love, it meant you had to throw on Troy Pride. If you wanted to avoid Troy Pride, it meant you had to throw on Julian Love, right? And that's why the times when Julian Love or Troy Pride went down, Troy Pride was out for the Pitt game. If you remember, Pitt picked on Dante Vaughn. And then, of course, Julian Love goes down against Clemson, and they picked on Dante Vaughn. So the depth has got to get there too. And Dante was banged up that year. You know, obviously he's been in the NFL for a couple of years. I mean, he was a better player than he was that year. And he was better in 2019 than he was in 2018 because he was healthier. You know, He was playing injured in 2018. So the depth has got to get better too. You can't just be like, yeah, I got a couple really good players. You've got to establish a depth, and that's what Mike Mickens is responsible for, and what he's got to build up. So it is a big offseason for this group. And look, if it's going to get better, you should start to see it this spring. And something I'm also excited about, Vince, is this should be a spring where by the end of the spring we start to see the receivers start giving the DBs a bigger test, because that's something I'm very curious about. How much did the lack of technical play from the receivers impact the corners when they went to play teams that were technically well schooled? North Carolina's receivers know how to run routes in that air raid offense, right? I mean, Drake London was a good route runner for USC. You know, Oklahoma State's guys were good route runners. Like when they've played really fundamentally sound receivers, they've tended to have some problems.
That's interesting.
There were times, but there was also times they played well. You know, like they shut Purdue's, they shut David Bell down for the most part, and a lot of that, so it's not like they were bad all the time. But we've talked about this with the line play, right? Like Harry Hiestan's lines made you better. Well, the complaint we've had about the receivers is they don't know how to get off the line. And so what is one of the areas that Clarence Lewis tends to struggle? He tends to struggle when he's got to open up and run, and he often loses guys there. Well, he's not getting challenged like that in practice.
It's a one day a week, or one day every 3 weeks potentially, where he's going to have to deal with that, as opposed to in every practice situation.
Right. So that's the question that I have. So if Chancey Stuckey is the coach we hope and think he's going to be, and what the early returns say he is, that is going to improve the cornerback play. Or they're just, let me say, it's going to improve it, or it's going to force them to make decisions, because you can't exploit the weaknesses if you aren't coached better, and if you don't have, better players doing the things they need to do. Sure. You're going to have Lorenzo Styles in year 2. Deion Colsey's going to be in year 2. You're going to have Braden Lindsey this spring. You're going to have, your running backs are going to be doing some slot stuff. You're going to have number 2 tight ends. You're going to have Lorenzo Styles, obviously, is going to be a big part of this. So you're going to have Jaden Thomas. You're going to have some good receivers talent-wise. But then if those guys start playing with better technique towards the end of spring, if you're not playing with good technique, you're going to get more exposed now than you would have before. And I think that's something I'm very curious to see. And here's the other part is, in past years, the corners have had to kind of go up against giants, right? Like Troy Pride and Julian Levitt to go up against giants. And at times when they'd play maybe some of the smaller, shiftier receivers, they'd have a couple more mistakes. Well, now you've got more of a blend at the receiving core. Yeah. And in fact, you don't have as many of the big receivers. And I think that should help them a little bit too, because those guys tend to be more route running oriented. Braden Lindsey, we've heard about, we had in our offensive intel piece about how he's really improved his game, not just being fast, but he's learning how to play receiver now, finally, after 4 flipping years. Lorenzo Styles came in as a pretty advanced guy, but he's taken his game to another level. Deion Colsey's learning how to do some of those things. Those are some talented dudes that are going to challenge the corners, and I think that's going to help them. It's always better to get pushed by guys that are on your level or even better.
Absolutely. Yes. That's only going to make them better.
That's going to impact them. I'm very curious how that's going to impact them. So those are all the storylines for this group, fans. I'm sorry. Go ahead, buddy.
No, and I was just going to say, I had never thought about that aspect of the corner play and how they weren't getting pushed in practice. Like that never,
challenged.
Makes sense.
They're getting pushed. Let's just say challenged, because I think pushed is more like Mike Mickens isn't pushing them. Right. And I think they are. Challenged.
From an offensive standpoint, like from the wide, I hadn't really put that together. It makes sense. It makes perfect sense. But
because we talk about it with the Lions all the time.
Absolutely. I think that makes perfect sense. And that's going to be. You're right. I think the offense, and if anybody hasn't read your offensive intel from last week, come on now. But it's all right there talking about the receivers and how. Right. Yeah.
And just so you know, too, we did include links to the 2 intel pieces, offense, defense, and the Cardinal Tate piece that the whole staff put together last night. We all of those are linked on the front page. There's a story in the front page with links to all those intel pieces, but you have to be a member of the message board to read those. But the other 2 is you can do more good on good during the regular season with receivers and DBs than you can linemen.
Absolutely.
Because you do one-on-ones almost every day. You can do 7-on-7s against each other every day. And so that is another thing is you will see skill players challenge each other more in practice during the season than maybe you see from a line standpoint. So
Right.
that's another advantage to where if the receivers are better, it'll improve the DBs, and then vice versa. If the DBs then improve their game, it should help the receivers because you're going to have a better you're going to get exposed more, right? When you practice against great players, you get exposed. And Mike Elko said this. What did he call the 2017 offensive line? They're human lie detectors, right? Remember that when he called them that? He's like, because you're going to get exposed for who you are. There's no lying about it. There's no hiding from that group. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I don't know. I don't remember if he said about the whole line or if it was just Quentin Nelson that he called that, but it's true. It's the same thing here. And so that's the thing I'm excited about. That's the thing that where Chancey Stuckey's, if he is what we think and hope he is, it's not just going to impact that group. It's going to impact more groups. And that's why you want to have great coaches across the board, not just 4 or 5 really good coaches and then 4 or 5 not good coaches, which is what we've seen so much of in the past.
Speaking of coaches, you're just a master of transitions. So let's talk about.
I need to be. I'm the one that came up with the outline. If I can't even transition my own outline, I stink at this thing.
Oh,
but it could also be true.
Perfect transition though. So let's talk some Mike Mickens here, Brian, because look, this is a huge year for Mike, and if I'm being honest, I expected to see more guys on the field last year because of Mike Mickens. Okay.
Right.
And the jury's still out for me a little bit. I still think Mike is a really, really good coach, but I wanted to see some of the younger guys get some time when some other guys were struggling last year. And so I don't know if that's a matter of those guys just weren't ready. Are they not being coached up? What I don't know. Yeah. Like those are questions. So this now becomes a really big spring for not only this group, but for Mike as well. And moving forward into the fall and into the season, I need to see the depth. You talked about the depth in the intro. This is where if he can't develop this depth, then I think those question marks become bigger.
Yeah, I think when you look at it, I think Coach Mickens has done some good things in Notre Dame.
Sure.
And there's some areas where I felt like he'd be doing a little better job right now, if we're being completely honest.
Right.
And that's the thing you talk about. Like I can make some excuses for last year that would be valid. Including, hey, listen, Ryan Barnes didn't play as a senior and then missed time during the spring because of COVID, and that put him off. Philip Riley, that's the one you can't make excuse for, but Chance Tucker was banged up the whole year. JoJo Johnson tore his ACL. So there are so many different things that I could say, hey, look, here's the reason why this was a problem. And say, like, okay, Cam Hart, your stud corner, he was a guy that you look at and say, hey, look, he was moving to a new position, right?
Right.
There's all types of things that you can point to and say, hey, look, here's the reasons why, because he has done some good things too, right? Like he made Nick McLeod a much better player at Notre Dame than he was at NC State, right? And he made Cam Hart. I mean, he's helped convert Cam Hart from a receiver into a guy that people are saying with a good year could be a day 2 pick in the NFL draft, right?
Absolutely.
And so there have been some good things. And I would argue that the fact that he's made Clarence Lewis a starting caliber player this early in his career is a coaching achievement as well. But yeah, I expected more from last year's group, but there's some things you can point to, like I said, Barnes not having a senior year, then getting hurt or sick, not even getting sick, but just testing positive for COVID. JoJo getting hurt, Chance being banged up all year, and then you say, well, the only guy that really had no excuse not to play more was Philip Riley. And, but then it's one of those things you say, hey, look, you could then say, look, Tariq Bracey helping Tariq Bracey get his confidence back was a positive achievement for Mike Mickens last year.
We talked about that
now,
a lot.
Now the confidence is back. Now it's okay. Can you then help Tariq get to that next level? Those are the questions for Coach Mickens. Now this spring, we're not going to see if we're not going to see as much of Cam Hart this spring, which we'll get into later. So we're not going to necessarily get to see how much his game has grown because, like a lot of guys, he's just, they're resting him and letting him recover from some offseason, stuff and not pushing him too much. But the other side is like, look, we need to see Clarence make a big jump. We need to see Tariq now take his game to another level. But to your point, we need to see those young guys really make leaps. And it's not just, the players have to be part of it. We've always said the players have to, they have to do their job, but it can't always be, well, look, they got to step up and play. No, you got to coach them up and get them ready to play. And Coach Mickens, I think, has proven at different stops that he's been able to get young guys ready. I think that's the big surprise for me is he had Nick Johnson was as a true freshman, an all-conference guy in the MAC at Bowling Green. He got Sauce Gardner, Ahmed Gardner was an All-American, third-team All-American as a true freshman, right? And ironically from the same high school as Dante Moore. But, he was a guy that was also obviously first-team freshman All-American, but like just pure third-team All-American. He's about to be a first-round pick. Coach Mickens recruited him, coached him up as a freshman, and he laid a foundation for the success they've had at corner the last 2 seasons. And we haven't seen him really be able to do that with the young guys in Notre Dame yet.
Right.
And that's something that I want to see. So, getting the most out of the veterans, and then also because it's a two-way street, right? It's you got to get the veterans as good as possible. Like a lot of people say, no, coach those young guys up and help them pass up the veterans. Clarence Lewis was a true sophomore last year, right? Like nobody, when they signed him, nobody was like, yeah, he's going to be starting for a year and a half at Notre Dame. It's first year and a half. He was thrust into that role too early because of past recruiting issues, right? And so, no, your job is twofold: get the most that you can get out of Clarence Lewis and Tariq Bracey and Cam Hart, while also building up the young guys to create more competition. That's the ultimate goal. It's not, hey, get Ryan Barnes and Philip Riley to pass those guys up. No, if Clarence Lewis starts this year because those other guys get a lot better and Clarence gets better and just beats them out, okay, cool. This isn't he's doing his job if Clarence Lewis isn't in the starting lineup anymore.
Agreed.
It's not necessarily that, but if Clarence Lewis doesn't improve, and that's true, then you have to start saying, why isn't Coach Mickens able to have the success that he had previously? Now, I'll give you a little tidbit. Vince, you and I have talked about this off the air. I was really surprised how often you'd see Brian Kelly going at Mike Mickens in games. And just talking to some different sources, there was something there for some reason that I wonder how. I feel like there was perhaps a little bit of a toxic environment for Coach Mickens. And I don't know where that came from. I don't know if because he's a former player, Brian Kelly still talked to him like he was a former. I don't know what it was.
Yeah.
Because he played for Brian Kelly at Cincinnati. I have to think that I believe there's something there. Like when you're concerned about your job, you're not going to go out and throw a bunch of young guys on the field when your head coach keeps coming at you and you're thinking like, dude, I'm going to have a job.
A similar argument with Dell Alexander, right? When wasn't it Dell that there was riffs?
There's always that concern. Like
he didn't want to send a young guy out there to make a mistake and then get
Kelly
yelled
at another guy. Right.
Now
that's a little bit different. Like, but it's along the same lines as when you're coaching for your job, you can't take hey, let me just throw this, let me work on. It's like, look, I got to get these veterans ready because and that I don't think that's going to be the case anymore. I think it's going to be hey, Coach Mickens, just go do your job, man. Like you're good at this. This is why if you're Coach Freeman, this is why I kept you. We've known each other a long time. I have your back. Go out there and do what I know you can do. Do what you did at Cincinnati, right? When we worked together. Do what you did at Bowling Green, which is why we brought you over to Cincinnati, right? Is the work you did at Bowling Green, and I think that's going to have a role too. And I've been waiting to kind of do this show to kind of talk about that. But I feel like there was a real toxic environment, Brian Kelly, which is funny because he would accuse other coaches of creating toxic environments. Really, he was the one creating the toxic environment. We've talked about the insults he would throw at Jeff Quinn in front of players. We've talked about that. We've talked about basically Dell Alexander coached out of fear. Can't have that. You have to have that healthy, if I don't do my job, I'm not going to be here anymore. But every coach knows that.
Right.
But you can't have it to where you're being shown up in front of your players by the head coach the way that Brian Kelly did it. Now, there is a way to correctly do that, and some coaches do that. Like Urban Meyer would do that, and before he became a toxic guy. But hey, I need your guys to play better. Coach, come on, man. You got to get your guys aren't making plays today. I need your guys to make more plays. There's a right way to do that, and I think Brian Kelly way past that line with some coaches. Yeah. And Charlie Weiss was that way with Brian Poling, if you remember.
Yeah,
and the point is it's undermining. It's undermining of that coach.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
And he did it to Jeff Quinn. He did it to Dell Alexander. And I believe he did it to Mike Mickens, according to some conversations I've had with several people. And so I think that not being there anymore, and the head coach is now someone, because look, Mike Mickens working for someone he's known his whole life is not going to make him relax more in that I don't have to worry about my job. He still had, if anything, it's like, I want to do right by my guy.
Exactly.
But without the same fear of if my guy's going to give a play, he's going to embarrass me in front of the whole team. I think Marcus Freeman's going to be able to handle those things. If a coach isn't doing his job the correct way, he's going to be able to go out there and say, hey, we're going to handle it, right? There needs to be accountability with coaches. It doesn't always have to be, let me embarrass you in front of your players. Let me scream at you on the sideline during the game. It seemed like every game I would say something to you, like, did you see Kelly going off on Mickens again? Like every time they'd give up a play, and it wasn't a ton, Kelly's over there screaming at him.
Right.
Like, man, it's like, it wasn't a healthy environment. So
yeah.
I think that's something that I look at, Vince, and say, those are things you wonder, how does that impact Mike Mickens' job? Well, he doesn't have – we don't have that to blame anymore is kind of the long answer to this. We can't blame Brian Kelly in creating a toxic environment anymore. All the pieces are in place for Coach Mickens. You've got now 2 years worth of your recruiting classes on campus. You've now you're going into year 3 with these players, right? You've now had 2 full springs after this spring. So you can't use, they lost development time because of COVID 2 years ago now, right? Like once this spring's over with, all the excuses that you could use are gone. Not that Coach Mickens would ever make it. I know him a little bit, but in those 2 years, I've never heard him in a public event, in a private conversation, ever make an excuse for anything, ever. So I'm not saying he's going to make them. We're saying there's things we understand. But what we're saying from our standpoint is there are no more excuses.
And that's
he's got to go out and get it done. And I think he's capable of it.
I think that's the key, because everything that you mentioned about some injuries and about some COVID and all of that different stuff, those are all valid. And those are all valid. And I don't want to use the word excuses, but they're valid reasons why certain things maybe didn't happen the way I wanted them to happen, right? And your explanation of his potential relationship with Brian Kelly also plays into that. So those are all kind of explained away up to this point. Now those aren't there, right? Those things aren't there anymore. And so this is why it's such a big year for Coach Mickens and his group. Right. Because those reasons aren't there anymore. The head coach isn't there anymore. Hopefully there's not going to be injuries and things of that nature. So he can take this group, he can mold this group, he can get them ready to play at a very high level, because they're going to arguably be going up against pretty darn good wide receiving core, in game
we
one.
think, right.
In game one.
Yeah.
Well,
in game one. Yeah.
I'm talking about game one. Yeah.
Yes.
So
no question.
So he's gonna have a really early test, right? And we're gonna see what this depth is like. And if a guy isn't cutting it, is there gonna be somebody that can go in and step up? So again, we're not gonna see everything this spring, obviously. We've said that about every position group that we've talked about up to this point, but we're gonna get a really good idea, I think, moving forward.
I think one of the interesting things about the practice schedule, like, look, ideally we want to be at more. We can't be. It is what it is. Right. But sometimes when you go periods, you can, it's kind of like when you don't see a relative, right? Your brother has a kid, right? And you see him at 2, you see him at 4, you see him at 6. You're like, the growth is noticeable for you as opposed to someone who sees him every day. Right.
Absolutely.
And wow, you've grown a couple inches. And I think that's kind of something that we could see is we're going to have a better sense of being able to see practice 1 and then see practice, 12. And we'll be able to kind of see like, oh, okay, like I see this, I see that. And, and that's the kind of thing is like you start looking for, okay, what am I looking for in this first practice? And then, kind of where do we go from there and all those type of things. So those are the things we'll be able to evaluate. But again, just like the offensive line, spring is just a step in the process.
Yeah.
You're not going to be finished. If guys are finished products by the end of the spring, that's actually a bad thing. Because if you can't get any better, that's a problem.
Right.
And so that's something that we're gonna find out.
Absolutely.
We're gonna find out.
So you mentioned earlier that Cam Hart is going to be limited this spring. Let's get into a little bit of that and what that means for the rest of the depth chart as well.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a great opportunity we talk a lot about Ryan Barnes, right? Like Cam Hart, that's your guy. We love Cam Hart. We think did some great things last year. If he's willing to work on his game, which I don't I've never heard anyone say he's not.
Right.
He's got a chance to really be just a special player next year. But him being a bit limited, I don't know if he's going to be completely out. I don't know the answer to that, but I know he's at least going to be limited, especially in contact stuff, so like team and 7-on-7 and stuff like that. We do believe he'll be limited, and at least limited. And so what that does is that opens up opportunities for other guys, right?
Absolutely.
And and Philip Riley opens up a chance for him to get more playing time. It opens up more playing time for like Ryan Barnes. A lot of these guys are going to get more playing time, and so right now Ryan Barnes is a guy that we hope is going to get one of those chances. And I'm very curious to find out too is, are they going to try playing Clarence Lewis on both sides just to try to get Ryan Barnes some more work since when Cam Hart's not in there? Because right now Cam Hart's the field guy, Clarence Lewis is going to be the boundary guy, and then Ryan Barnes is going to be behind Clarence Lewis in the boundary, pushing him. So are there going to be opportunities or times when they say, hey, let's move Clarence Lewis back over to field and give Ryan a chance in the boundary, or vice versa? Because I don't really care where he plays. Just let him get opportunities to get out there and play.
Exactly.
That's going to be the big thing.
Yeah.
Whether that's field, boundary, slot, whatever. I think that's something that I want to see. So sometimes, like, look, you want to have your guys out there. You always prefer to have your all your guys out there.
Of course.
But you can also look at it, it's like, okay, I don't have this guy. So this opens up an opportunity for me to see more of this guy and this guy and this guy. So when we talk about the younger players and we talk about Cam Hart being out, like, look, Philip Riley, you're going to get a ton of reps. Jaden Mickey, you're going to get a ton of reps. So it does present an opportunity for those younger guys. And we'll talk about each one kind of more individually, but that is the thing where, Cam's not going to get as much of a chance, we don't think, to kind of continue to grow his game on the field. That'll come more summer and fall. But the flip side is you now get a chance to go out there and get those younger guys reps. I'm sorry, I have to pull this up. So this handle is phenomenal.
What?
I made the comment in the show recently that when I was a kid, I had a crush on Christy Brinkley, right? And so this is phenomenal. The handle, for those that listen on the podcast, not the live show, is the guy's handle is Billy Joel landed Driscoll's girl. That is so awesome.
Wow.
But he said, could BK's issues with Mickens be because he was a Freeman guy and BK resented Freeman's popularity with the team? 100%.
I was going to say.
I actually believe that's true.
I think you nailed it, to be honest with you.
100%.
The ego.
So this person right here is 2 for 2. Phenomenal handle, right? And then 2, great question, or great observation, in my opinion. Yeah, I do think there's something to that, because BK got super petty last year.
Oh my gosh,
super petty. I mean, for a head coach to basically check out halfway through the season,
which he did,
says everything you know about him as a person.
Yeah,
because screw my players, screw my coaches. I'm gonna do what's right by me, and just it sums up Brian Kelly to a T. But yeah, I believe there's something to that. I believe that and I think that's partly why Brian Kelly wanted out. Part of it was, we understand that, right?
I just wanted to address that.
There wasn't an issue the year before.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. The issue became when Marcus Freeman got here and they were close. They had, because like before, it was like, oh, Brian Kelly hired one of his players, his former players. Well, then it became, oh, Mike Mickens is Marcus Freeman's friend from high school and they're former Cincinnati guys. And, and then seeing all the love that the Cincinnati players gave to them after the game and all those other kind of things. I don't think Brian Kelly expected Marcus Freeman to get, and we kind of warned about this last year when people were talking about, remember before the season when people were talking about, Marcus Freeman being the coach and waiting, we were like, I wouldn't be talking about that too much. I don't know how that's going to be received. Yeah, on top of the fact we need to see the guy coach a game on defense first.
Yeah,
But 100%, I think there's something to that. But again, that's gone now. So now it's like, hey, Coach Mickens, just go coach, baby. Like, you don't got to worry about all that other nonsense and childishness and all that other kind of stuff. That toxicity is going to be gone now. And now it's about, hey, guys, you got everything you wanted. Now it's time to say, okay, excuses are gone. Go coach, go develop, go win. And that's the thing, is like we've said this before, we're not lowering the bar because we may like Marcus Freeman or we may like Mike Mickens or whoever else. The standard is still the standard. And Marcus Freeman hasn't backed down from that. He hasn't said, hey, guys, look, it's a new year, right? We're losing some guys, right? Give us some time. Marcus Freeman hasn't asked for that.
Nope.
Quite opposite. He said, look, there's a standard here of excellence and championships and everything he's done, he's embraced. Sean Davis has talked about this a lot. And I don't know if he's talked about this on his podcast or not, but he and I have talked about this, and we've talked about it on the show. We have been surprised at how often Notre Dame players in interviews talk about championships, especially on defense. Where's that coming from? Do you think they just had a group meeting of players?
Right.
No, that's coming from the guy at the top.
Right.
And the defensive players are especially more buying into it because the defensive players are going to naturally have a more of affinity for Marcus Freeman than the offensive players because
of course
he shouldn't. I mean, he went up and shook every guy's hand before practice. That was cool and everything, but he's not sitting down with the offensive lineman last year talking with him. He shouldn't have done that. That's not his role. He's a defensive coordinator.
Right.
So it's going to take some time for the offensive players to kind of adapt that as well. But that's also kind of why we're excited to see some of the energy we saw from Tommy Rees in his press conference and hearing a lot of the positive vibes coming out from the offense about how there's a growing confidence on the offensive side of the ball that, again, starts at the top. Because now Tommy Rees the handcuffs have been broken, right? Mike Mickens, the handcuffs have been broken. Right. That's the whole point with this whole thing is there's no more excuses, guys, right? There's no more excuses. It's time to go out and develop and go coach and have fun and be energetic and do what you got to do because it's needed.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing is, you've got all these young guys. The other thing, too, is, Ryan Barnes, you don't have to teach him how to go through drills anymore. Philip Riley, you don't have to teach him how to go through. Last year in the spring, it was, here's how to line up. Here's your first step.
Right.
Here's your second step. Here's how you use your hands. Here's where your eyes should be. All the things that Troy Pride talked about last night, like teaching your eyes first and the feet and the hands and all that. They need to know all the basics now. Now it's like, okay, now it's like you went through football 101 last year.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's time to start getting into some of these higher level courses. That's the other thing that should be different this spring as well is there's one new dude on the roster right now at corner, and he's one of the more advanced corners Notre Dame has signed in 10 years, Jaden Mickey. I mean, Jaden Mickey's just going to show up knowing how to play, and he's going to have supreme confidence.
Yeah,
as we talked about in that intel piece, like he's like Kavari Russell reincarnated as a player, just nonstop. And I love that in the corner. Like he's going to be in your ear, just yapping, just nonstop, and you're just going to get annoyed with him.
Receivers are soft, man. Like I was a receiver, so
But he's going to be in their ear, and
I love.
If you want him to shut up, then go beat him. And then you beat him, and you think he's going to shut up, and he's like, "Nope, it's not shutting up." He's just making him talk more. But I love that kid. But the point is, he's not going to show up like, I don't know how to play. I'd miss he played in one of the best leagues in high school football in the entire country. Yeah. And he was a dude in that league, and he's advanced and he's physical and all those kind of things. So again, last year, it was a very young position group. You had Cam Hart, who had rarely played any corner. Clarence just finished up his freshman year. Barnes was an early enrollee. Mickey was an early enrollee. I mean, not Mickey. Riley was an early enrollee. You didn't have Chance on campus yet. You didn't have JoJo on campus yet. It's a really young group.
It was,
and that's not an excuse. We're framing what the spring is going to look like. So last spring, it's very much hey, it's the basics, guys. Here's how you line up. Here's this call. Here's that call. Right. You're installing a brand new defense. Marcus Freeman was bringing all types of new coverage changes and things like that. And now it's like, hey, we know the defense. We know where to line up. Everybody's been here before. And now because you have so many older guys that have been through it, now you don't have to, with the one freshman, even if he wasn't advanced, he can now lean on veterans more. Because here's one of the things that you have to understand when you have a system change is there's no veterans that the younger players can lean on. Hey, this is new for me too, buddy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I'm not used to this. And it was Mike Mickens' first full spring. Because remember, they had his first year, they had one spring and it was gone. So now that foundation has been laid. Now it's up to Coach Mickens to say, hey, let's take this thing to another level. But now Clarence is a veteran. So Jaden Mickey can go pick his ear a little bit. Right. Hey, Clarence, what do I do with this? Last year, you couldn't really do that.
Right.
Now Treat Bracey's been in the system a couple of years. Now Cam Hart's a more veteran player. And I think those things also matter that we don't talk enough about Those things matter. When you have a coach that now we all know what Coach Mickens wants. We all know the expectation, right? And we can all hold each other accountable to that. Because that's the thing is great units, they coach each other as well.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you don't override the coach, but like when the coach is over here talking to so-and-so, veterans, you'll see it all the time in practice events. We used to see this all the time with Harry Heastand's guys. Coach Heastand's over here talking to this guy, and Robert Hainsey or Quentin Nelson or Alex Bars is over there in the ear of some other young guy saying, hey, look, this is what you need to do, because they've set that standard. And that's something that Coach Heastand would embrace.
That's what I work on with my kids in high school. Right. It's like, hey, seniors, you've been around. Like, if I'm over here, you see a freshman doing something wrong, coach them up. You know what I mean? And it also takes time for that to develop. I will say that. That takes time. But Coach Mickens has been there for 2 years, right? So that time is now. Like, you should be able to see that more often. And now that you're right, now that these guys are veterans, they can do that some more, and they're going to have more confidence, because that takes confidence as a leader to be able to do that. And I think that is an understated point of leadership. It takes confidence to be a leader. You know, whether you're one of these or you're a leader by whatever. And
not even just confidence in yourself, Vince, confidence in the system. I got to know what
coach and in your system.
I can't
and all
teach you something that I don't know.
Exactly.
You know? And
absolutely.
That's where experience can matter. That's where experience that can have a big impact, not just on your knowledge, but your ability to kind of the whole route. Because see, here's the thing now, this is why it matters. If you're learning a new system and we're working on 7-on-7 together, or we're sitting there doing a film session together, because, you know, we're only allowed to be with the coaches so long. It's like, what am I supposed to do here? I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I don't know. But when now Clarence Lewis can look at the film and be like, man, like, you can coach yourself. You can look at my right foot needs, you know, I stepped too far with my right foot, which caused me to lunge, which caused that guy to dismiss me, and he smokes me, right? Like, he can now look at that and coach himself up and say, man, this is where I screwed up. Or, you know what? I was supposed to be inside leverage on that guy, and I was outside leverage, and that's why I got beat, right? That's why he was able to beat me so easy on a poster. I lined up wrong. Whereas before, it's like, wait a minute, hold on. I thought I was supposed to be outside on this one. No, I'm supposed to be inside on this one. Like, they can coach themselves up. They can now go do drills together because they know what the expectations are. They know what the standard is. Yeah. Those are reasons where having some experience helps you to where, and it doesn't have to be like a fifth-year senior. It's just someone who's been in the system that knows the standard. And I think that's going to benefit Coach Mickens as well, because he doesn't always have to be he's not the only voice in the room now that can have an impact.
It knows what's going on.
They can now hold They can now hold each other accountable more, because they now know the standard. And so that should help more. So again, all these things are playing right into Coach Mickens' hands to where, hey man, it's time to get it going. And I have a lot of confidence in Mike Mickens as a coach. I think that sometimes we focus on the things he hasn't done great and not giving him enough credit for the things he's done really well. Yeah. You know, I mean, but now it's like, okay, but now you really got to raise everybody to another level. Right. And I'm excited to see it because like I said, I have a lot of confidence in him as a coach. Now I hope that he goes out and really makes it obvious why I have that confidence and that the confidence was rightly placed. So, but because I do think there's good players. Are there elite players? Is this an elite room? No. Is this a room that you say, boy, this is one of the 5 to 8 best cornerback rooms in the country? No, I don't think so. I don't think it's there yet. I think there's still work to be done, but it's a room that should be a lot better than it's been. Right. And that's the key.
They should be able to.
It doesn't have to be elite. Right. It doesn't have to be an elite room. It just has to be good enough to where when the defensive line and the linebackers and everybody else does their job, that you can go out there. Because I think the D-line room can be a top 10 room. I think the linebacker room can be a top 10 room. I think the safety room can be a top 10 room in time. There's a lot of work to get done with all those groups.
Of course.
But they all have the chance to be there, which then takes some of that burden off of the corners.
Yeah.
But the thing is, whether they're a top 10 room or a top 20 room, they have to be the best version of themselves. And that's the task for Coach Mickens this spring.
So you just got done talking about veteran leadership and how that's going to help Coach Mickens. Let's talk about some of those veterans, right? I mean, you've got Clarence Lewis, you've got Tariq Bracey. Both of those guys are going to be, full go in the spring. And both of those guys, we need to see that next step, right? I mean, we need to see across the board when we're talking about anybody going into spring, we need to see that next step. But before we were talking about Clarence or about guys needing to fix their confidence, for example, or whatever the case may be. Well, that seems to be in order. Okay, well, now it's time to fix the play. Not fix, but take the play to another level.
Right. I think let's start with the oldest. Let's go Tariq Bracey.
Okay.
I don't know if he's ever going to kind of take that final step where his talent becomes like, I just don't think he's necessarily a natural football player. I think he's always going to be more of an athlete than a natural football player. So, but I think the thing that you need to work with him on is like, just, you got to eliminate the mistakes, right? Like try to eliminate the technical mistakes and things like that, because there were times last year where Tariq was really good in the slot. And that, I just think that's what he's going to be. He's going to be a slot guy that works inside and outside. And at times last year, he was a really good player because he didn't just play the slot last year. I mean, he was part of a 3-man rotation that he would replace Clarence Lewis at times. He would replace Cam Hart at times. And he did a good job, right? And so he's slowly starting to get his confidence back. I think that was the task last year. That's back. Now it's just about like the little things. That's what Tariq is missing. The little things that would kind of get him beat. Like, look, you're 5'10". You can't play a post route from behind. You have to play it from the front or from underneath, or, there's those little things that he's going to have to learn as a player that should help him improve. And then it's just about like eliminating some of those little things that would kind of result in those big plays happening.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because he was solid last year. I mean, Tariq was solid last year. He had a good year, not a great year, a good year. If he can eliminate some of those little things that result in some of those occasional, giving up that big play, he's going to be a good player for Notre Dame. And, that's going to be the key for him this spring. For Clarence Lewis, go ahead, Vince. Sorry.
I was just going to say, Tariq needs to find his niche, I almost feel like. I don't know. I just feel like he may not ever be the starter, but if he can find his niche as maybe just the guy who comes in for rest, or the guy who gets a series here and there, or whatever, but if he can just carve out that role, I think he can be a huge asset to this team. I think that's the key for me, is that we talked about it in one of the other shows about kind of knowing where your having realistic expectations, if that makes sense. And I feel like for Tariq, I think a realistic expectation is that he can carve out a niche, find a role and carve out that niche. Like, I feel like that should be his expectation. And if he can do that and he puts everything he has into it, and maybe also being a really good special teams player at the same time, he can really benefit this team. And I think that's going to be, expectation setting levels is going to be really important for Tariq, to me.
So areas that I want to see improvement from him, obviously playing the deep ball better, but I also want to see him learning to be more reactive to quick stuff. Like, that's the thing, is with his speed, he should be breaking on short stuff better. Like, those are the things I want to see, is like, see it better, react to it better. A guy like him shouldn't be giving up 60% completions over the course of a year. He shouldn't. And that's where he was. And that's an area where he's going to have to improve. And I'm going to say the same thing, Vince, about Clarence Lewis. So when I look at Clarence Lewis, Clarence is a guy that does some nice things. He's a tough kid. He's still had sophomore strength, which means, he's got to get stronger there.
Sure.
But he's a guy that to me, when you watch him play, part of it is him getting better. The other part of it is they have to learn to use him better. And I think kind of moving him from field to boundary last year kind of jacked that up a little bit. If they're going to leave him in the boundary, then they have to say, hey, look, we like Clarence. These are the things Clarence does well, right? He's good at things in front of him. He can keep things in front of him. He's a good tackler. He reminds me a lot of like Nick Watkins.
Yeah.
When he was in Notre Dame, where, but they were asking him to like line up and play press and coverage and run with people like they did with Nick McLeod. Well, Nick McLeod went out and ran a 4.3 something, right? Like, so, and he would still get beat deep. I guarantee you Clarence Lewis isn't running in the 4.3s, right? And he also doesn't play the ball well on those vertical routes the way that he does. So you've got to be willing to adjust your coverages in a way to say, hey, look, we like to play a lot more man, but we just can't play a ton of man in the boundary. And if we are, we're going to play 2-man, which allows us to be aggressive up front with our corners and our nickel, but we're going to protect them over the top with safeties.
Yeah.
Now, that can only happen if the linebacking core gets better, because that puts a lot of pressure on the linebackers.
Go man to man.
Because, well, not just man to man, but in the run game, because the safeties aren't coming down in a robber, right? They're staying back.
Yeah, right.
And so your corners got to be really good in tackling. when you get run on, and then your linebackers have to be real disciplined and real effective. So I don't know how much we're going to see that. That's not really been Marcus Freeman's MO, but the point is you can do some combo coverages, maybe where you help out. Having Maris Luafau, how does that impact how they use Clarence Lewis in the boundary? Because now you have a Will that's long and rangy that you can maybe jump underneath some stuff that allows Clarence to play back. So that to me is as much as anything. I'm curious to see how they use him this year, because I think at times, we fault the players, right? Well, Clarence Lewis got beat. My contention is, but he shouldn't have been asked to play press man coverage against that guy.
It's not his thing.
You he can't run with Alec Pierce. After a couple times of getting beat in the bowl game, it's like, why do you keep putting him in that position? You know what I mean? It's like, that's a coaching thing. Like if I have a kid that can't catch a deep ball and I keep having him run post routes, that's not on him anymore. That's on me, right? We know he can't. We know that's not a strength of his. And this is something that I loved about what Clark Lee had said a couple years ago. And I haven't had a chance to ever talk about this with Coach Freeman. And I clearly haven't talked about it with Coach Golden because I don't know Coach Golden.
Right.
But Coach Freeman said something, or Coach Lee said something to me a couple years ago, like at the very beginning of his tenure, that I loved. He said, we're sitting in this meeting, and he goes, and I had to stop the meeting, and I had to tell my defensive coaches, stop telling me what these kids can't do. Start talking to me about what they're good at. Let me know what they're good at, and then we can build a defense around what they're good at.
I love that quote. You brought it up a few times, and I love it. That's coaching 101 right there. 100%.
So with Clarence Lewis, instead of saying Clarence can't do this, Clarence can't do that, Clarence can't do this, let's say, okay, what is Clarence good at? Because if you can't name what he's good at, then he shouldn't be on the field. So clearly they think he's good at something.
Right.
And so, and this could be one of those things where, like, look, he was good in press coverage in practice. He just was getting beat in games. Well, why was he good in press coverage in practice? Because the receivers weren't taught how to get off the line.
Right.
Well, now you're going to see that more. This is the whole thing, is you now are going to know your own weaknesses more because they're getting exposed by your opposition in practice. That's a great thing. Because, hey, look, Clarence isn't good at this. How do you know that? Because he gets smoked by Deion Colsey every day when we ask him to play man coverage or something like that. You know what I mean? Like Julian Love. Remember going into 2018, he was an All-American in 2017 and had like 20-plus pass breakups, but he was mostly an off-man cover guy in 2017. Well, in 2018, they're thinking, Julian's a great player. Let's have him play more press coverage. So he went out in spring, and they were having him play more press coverage and stuff, and he got beat by Miles Boykin like he was like a redheaded stepchild. I mean, he just got destroyed daily, like on the regular, by Miles Boykin. And it was kind of like, yeah, that's not what he's good. That's not who Julian is. So then next year they just kept saying, oh, let's play off coverage. And then they tried to do it a little bit in the opener, playing man, and somebody from Michigan just ran by him for a 50-yard gain. And they're like, yeah, okay, we tried it. That's not who he is. And then they went back to letting him do what he was good at. And it's at one point in time, they kind of started flipping the field a little bit. When they wanted a guy to play press man in the boundary, they'd put Troy Pride over there, and, so even though he was primarily the field guy. So that's what you need to get from the staff is, look, what if you love Clarence, and they love Clarence Lewis, if you love Clarence Lewis and you think he needs to be a part of what you do, then figure out what Clarence is good at and build your coverage structure around that, which is a little bit easier to the boundary.
Yeah.
Because so that's what I'm curious to see. It's not even so much about Clarence. And now, are there things Clarence got to get better? Yeah. He's got to improve his footwork.
Yeah.
His transition technique stinks. It just does. It's so erratic. And there's times where it's just like, he can't run with that guy. But when he can't run with that guy is combined with that transition technique was awful, you're going to get torched. Right. And that's the area where those are areas where Clarence can continue to improve because he's still a young guy. He was still, again, this is only going to be Clarence Lewis's second spring. That's it. So we should start to see some jumps from him. And it's about the consistency. And I think the big thing for Tariq and Clarence both, the big thing for me is they have both got to create more incompletions.
Yeah.
And if you look at the Pro Football Focus numbers last year, it is a really problematic gap. So Cam Hart on the year, right? Again, this is kind of where you want to be. Opponents completed 48.5% of their throws on Cam Hart. And that includes him giving up 5 of 6 against Toledo on short stuff. But less than 50% of their passes. Oklahoma State, for example, in the bowl game went 1 of 5 against him. Right? That's kind of where you want to be. Virginia Tech went 1 of 5. Cincinnati went 0 of 4. Wisconsin went 0 of 7. And so those are the areas you want to be. He never gave up more than 64 yards receiving in a game, and that was against Purdue, and half of that came on one completion. If you remember, David Bell outplayed him for that one seam route for a big play. And so he was at 48.5% completion percentage allowed. Tariq Bracey was at 61.7, and Clarence Lewis is at 64.3. That is not a good number.
Not good enough. Yeah.
Not a good number. And Clarence Lewis 3 times allowed, gave up over 100 yards receiving in a game. And you just can't be there. And that was Cincinnati, USC, and Oklahoma State. You just can't be there. And so they've got to be more disruptive. Now, maybe that's being more aggressive and then using your safety to protect. Maybe that's, using your underneath guys to rob some of that stuff and letting them drive on the curls and the ends and the digs. There's all type of different things you can do schematically. You got to figure out what you want to be and what those guys are good at. But however it happens, they have to start creating more incompletions, because you can't have 2 of your 3 top corners giving up over 60% completion rate.
Absolutely.
Can't do
absolutely.
Can't be a great defense with that.
No.
And that's going to be a key.
Absolutely agree. So let's talk about some of the younger guys. You've got Riley and Tucker. So we didn't see a lot of them last year, obviously. And these guys can play. I feel like the little bit that I got to see in practice, I think these guys can play. I like watching them play. They've got the physical tools to play, but can they make a push to get on the field? That's going to be the big thing.
We didn't talk a lot about Ryan Barnes. I'm going to throw him in with this group as well, because he's going to get a chance. We mentioned he's going to be in competition.
We mentioned him. Yeah, right.
I think they can all play to different levels. I think with Ryan Barnes, it's the length. He's not a burner, but he's got at least 2 inches on.
He's the guy you look twice at when you see him on the field.
Right. Like, he's got at least 2 inches on Clarence Lewis in height. He's got at least 2 to 3 inches on him in length. That's a lot. And so he's a guy that has to become more assertive as a player, right? It's not on the coaches it's not the coach's job necessarily to push Ryan Barnes to like, hey, we're going to give him every chance to necessarily go out there. He's got to say, hey, it's their job to coach him up and make him the best version of himself. But it's then up to Ryan to say, hey, look, I got to go out there. I got to have some dog in me, right? I've got to have that mentality of, I'm going to go out there. You're not going to complete a pass on me. I'm going to make this play. I'm going to make that play. And I'm going to force myself onto the field. I'm going to make you play me. That's what you want to be as a coach. And that's where you want your players the mentality you want your players to have. Ryan's got to have that. I mean, he is sitting right behind Clarence Lewis. And they've all been told, from my understanding, like, look, everyone's in a battle. I mean, you got a new D coordinator. Everyone's in this battle. You got to go out there and compete. There are no guarantees. There are no, oh, well, you're a returning starter, so you're gonna still be the starter. Everybody's got a battle. So you've got to go out there, Ryan Barnes, and prove that you belong on the field. That means making more plays, using your strengths and making more plays. He's a guy, and I talked to some sources about this. This was one of the things that was in my intel piece. I said, of all the young guys, who right now is the best position to go out there and force their on the field? And it was Ryan Barnes. Mm-hmm. And so now he's got to go prove it. But now that was followed by Butt. I'm really excited to see what this guy can do. But with Philip Riley, it was about kind of changing his body around. He's going to be a field guy. They're also going to work him in the nickel because they like he's like a real strong kid, so he can bring you some things in the nickel. That he's gonna work there. And then the problem with Chance Tucker is the staff was really high on Chance in fall camp, but he just kept getting hurt. Yeah, so he's got to stay healthy. But from what I'm told, he's one of the faster corners they have. And the thing I loved about Chance in high school, because you remember when he signed, remember what I said? Like, I had him ranked real low in the class. And if you remember correctly, I said, I have a feeling this kid's going to make me look really stupid. Like, because I just, there was just something about him. I was like, I don't know what it is. Like, right. I don't see the speed that he had like great track times. I never saw that. But part of me was like, is he so fast that he just was like, his ball skills were great. His instincts were great. I just didn't see a real big kid. I didn't see an elite athlete. There was just something about Ryan, like, so my grades, like, so when I'm doing the grades, I got my 8 categories. Like, I'm not giving him great grades, but I'm like, this kid's film is better than my grades. You know what I mean? Like, there's just something about this kid where it's like, I have a feeling this kid's going to make me look stupid. The last kid that I felt that about was Kyron Williams. Like, I had him as ranked as one of the lowest kids in that class, and I was like, the way this kid plays, he's probably going to make me look stupid. Well, Kyron made me look stupid. And I'm happy about that.
Right.
What I don't
Those
want
are
is when
good
I rank a
yeah.
guy as like the number one guy in the class and he sucks, like,
Yeah, right.
but those are good. And I have a feeling Chance is one of those guys, but he's got to stay healthy. That's the thing, is he can't fall behind. When you got Benjamin Morrison and Jaden Mickey showing up, you can't keep missing practice. Not that he's like doing it on purpose. I mean, he had some
Right.
unfortunate injuries last year.
Right.
But if Chance can stay healthy, that's a guy that I have my eye on, because what I've been told about him is he's super long and he can fly, is what I've been told. And we saw the instincts on film. That's the one thing we knew, is this kid knows how to play the ball.
Right.
Now, if he can run like they say he can run, and if he can stay healthy and add more strength, because he's a real skinny kid, he's going to have to get stronger. He's a guy that I kind of have my eye on. He's probably the most intriguing player to me this spring, because he's the biggest unknown, because he just didn't play. So that's a guy that Vince is going to be on my, hey, Vince, when you're at practice, this is 18 is one of the kids I want you to keep your eye on.
Right.
Because I have a feeling he's gonna, like his dad maybe say, hey, like, remember when you had Chance ranked down here? You know what I mean? Like,
you know, so aren't petty like that. Come on now.
No, I say that because I know
I'm saying
from
my point of view.
Yeah, he's a really good dude.
I'm saying from my point of view. Right. If I was dad, I'd be like, "Hey, remember?" That's what I would do. So that's right. That's what I don't know.
He comes from good stock. He's got really good, his mom and dad are really cool people. So it's all in good fun. But
of course,
that's kind of what you hope for. You always want to hope that somebody that maybe you're not expecting breaks out. But those three guys are going to get a chance. And then of course, Jaden Mickey. You could literally beat him on 6 straight plays, and he's just going to think, he's going to be like, I don't care. You're not going to beat me the next time.
But isn't that what you need as a corner? Just have a short memory and a battler. And
so we had Troy Pride on the show last night,
right?
And I asked him, like, what are the mental traits you need to be a great corner? That's the first thing, because you've got to have a short memory. Like, you can't let those things. But now, short memory doesn't mean you don't look. Why did I get beat? Okay, my footwork was wrong. I wasn't like, but you can't let it bother you. You need to know why you screwed up or know why you got beat and fix it, but it just can't bother you. You just move on to the next play.
I mean, frankly, that's important at every position,
easier said than done.
But it's very much easier said than done.
Easier said than done.
All the time with kids.
Because normally when because most fans only watch on TV and they only see a guy when he gets caught. Troy was talking about, we would have these debates on our show or on our message board. We're like, I didn't even see Troy. Troy Pride's not that good. He was barely even noticeable last game. Like, you do realize that's a compliment, right? Like, you do realize when you don't notice a corner, that's a good thing.
Yeah, right.
But you only really see him when he's giving up a catch. Really, you don't see when the whole game when they're avoiding him. So there's a lot of pressure on that position. You're on an island, and you have to have that ability to just say, I don't care. I'll bounce back. And I think Jaden is that guy. He's physical, and one of the things we've heard from multiple sources is he's tested better than they thought he was going to test. And the 40 and the agilities and the jumps and all that, he's been more explosive athletically than they thought he was going to be. So that's always the kind of you don't ever want to be like, this kid's not as good as we thought he was going to be. You always want to be like, boy, we liked this kid, but he's even better than we thought. Like Josh Burnham's that way. Nolan Ziegler's that way. Where, I was talking to a source the other day about Josh, and he's like, he's huge. He's like 6'4". He's like a monster. And I said, is he going to outgrow Mike? They said he may outgrow it physically, but he still runs like a linebacker. And that's the thing that they're excited about. Nolan Ziegler during sprints doesn't run with, like, usually it's like receivers and corners and safeties run together. Then like linebackers and running backs run together and quarterbacks, and then like the linemen run together. Yeah. He's been running with the DBs in sprints. He doesn't run with the linebackers. Nolan Ziegler runs with the DBs. So those are things you always want to do. And then another guy that I've heard, Jeremy Price, has been super explosive, but the other guy's been Jaden Mickey. The people they loved him, but they're even the staff that loved him is like, this guy's faster than we thought. And he's another one of the players that did not have an offer when Marcus Freeman showed up. Just kind of back in that point. Benjamin Morrison, Jaden Mickey, Jalen Sneed, Junior Chalamaka were all guys that Notre Dame signed that did not have offers when Marcus Freeman showed up. The whole we have to shop down a different aisle. Maybe you were picking the wrong aisle.
Yeah.
just saying. So
love that.
So again, Vince, so what are we looking for this spring, right? Clarence Lewis has got to raise his game, right? He's got to be more disruptive. Mm-hmm. How are they going to use him this spring? Do we see coverage structure change based on him? Tariq Bracey's got to be more consistent. Ryan Barnes has to be more assertive, right? More aggressive. Philip Riley's got to find a niche. Chance Tucker's got to stay healthy and continue adding strength. And then Jaden Mickey's got to come out and say, hey, look, man, like make life real uncomfortable for the
I'm
guys.
here,
in front of
boys. Yeah, I'm here, boys.
Right.
Like,
You
yeah,
better not
absolutely.
take the day off. If you take the day
Yep.
off, and that's him and the whole sophomore class. They need to be like, hey, fellas, you may want to rethink, missing class or missing
Right.
practice today. A sprained ankle may not be that bad. You may not want to do that. You may not want to. Hey, I know you're worried about your girlfriend, but you better lock in today because I'm coming for you. You know what I mean? And because these are kids, right? I mean, they worry about this professor gave me a lot of work. I got this girlfriend problem. My mom's sick back home. And heck, I'm 43 and I was worried about that when my mom was sick. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And so what's an 18, 19-year-old going to be like? But hey, look, we're out here. You better focus up, man, because I'm coming for you. I think that makes you a better football team when you have that kind of depth. And that's the kind of So Marcus Reeves talked about competition. It's not just offense versus defense. The ideal competition also happens within a room. And it's not an adversarial thing.
Right.
It's got to be I'm pushing you thing. And that's what I hope it is. Because if it gets there, then I think that alone is going to raise the play of the cornerback room. Because if Clarence Lewis is starting, he had to beat out some guys that had really good springs and falls. And that's where you can feel more comfortable with where you are as a football team. And so, that's what we're looking for this spring. Just
Absolutely.
Overall, more confidence in the system, making more plays, and, really start to see that depth chart shake itself out. That's where we want to be when we look at this room and say, hey, this is how we'll know that the cornerback room is getting better and getting to the level where you feel like if they can continue down this path in the fall, they're going to have a chance to play the level Notre Dame needs to really raise that level of play. Anything to add, Vince, before we
No, I think you nailed it. I'm really, like I said, I think I have more question marks about this group, but it's not necessarily in a negative way. There's going to be a lot of fun watching these guys because I do have a lot of confidence not only in Coach Mickens, but in the talent that is in this room. And I think they are going to push each other, and I think they are going to make each other better, which is why I'm excited about it. So I'm looking forward to it for sure.
And tomorrow we get our first glimpse.
Yes,
and
sir.
We'll have a show about it, but guys, they're not wearing pads. Guys and gals are not wearing pads.
Yeah, right.
If a guy doesn't look good tomorrow without pads on, he should not be on scholarship at Notre Dame. Okay. So I'm just going to tell you right now, everybody's going to look athletic. They're going to look good. It's just,
yeah.
What?
I'm
just preparing you for it. So
right.
They're going to look like $1 million tomorrow. Okay. And it's let's find out on the 25th when Ryan and Sean are in town and we're having a full practice. There's going to be some scrimmages and the pads are on and pads are popping. And then we'll find out who's really ready to step up this spring. So, and we'll have the whole IB team. Well, except for me, we'll have the rest of the whole IB team at that one open practice, which I'm very excited about. So anyway, that's going to be it for the corner preview, but stick around because we are not done just yet. So it's time to kick off our Q&A portion of the show. So this is kind of our new format. So Ryan joins us and we do a Q&A after every show. Your questions can continue to be about the positions that we just discussed. Obviously, Ryan often is not a part of those discussions. Doesn't mean he doesn't have opinions and have knowledge on those things. So you can always continue to ask questions about that. You can ask any other team questions or recruiting questions. It's going to be like the summer, but it was hard to do it this way because Vince can't often stay for those. So that's why we appreciate Ryan stepping up and helping us get this going, Ryan. But before we kind of to dive into Toe Jam's question about Cardinal Tate, I wanted to see, first of all, if you have any thoughts that you want to kind of add about what you're looking for this spring from the corner room. What when we get to the end of the spring, what do you need to hear to make you feel like this group has kind of taken that step, knowing Cam Hart's going to be limited, but what are the things you want to hear to make you feel like this room is taking the steps it needs to take to kind of raise its game and play at a level that lets this defense be a championship caliber defense?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think that we talk about it so much on the recruiting side of everything, right? That cornerback recruiting in 2023 is so vital. And I think the biggest question marks with the team may be the opposite corner, from Cam Hart. And I think that that's a big emphasis that I want to watch during the spring is I want to see competitiveness. I want to see the competition. I want to leave spring and there be multiple guys that Notre Dame would feel comfortable with starting opposite of Cam Hart. Because right now it's just Clarence Lewis by default, right? Because you haven't seen it from Ryan Barnes yet. Philip Riley is moving to the field and working some in the nickel. You have other guys that you're excited about, but they're just question marks right now. I want to see guys step to the forefront and challenge and be able to take reps and to force their way up the depth chart. And I also want to see Clarence Lewis take a huge step forward and say, you guys aren't just going to take my spot that easily. Like, I'm going to come back here and I'm going to be a better player. Because that is, I mean, the iron sharpens iron thing is something that players talk about all the time, right? And I think it's true. I want to see players getting pushed. I want to see players pushing back. And I think that that's a huge emphasis in the quarterback room, because I think that there is talent there. It just has not materialized opposite of Cam at this point. And it's going to be a huge barometer, I think, of how good this team could be in 2022, excuse me. Because I think that that's one of the, when you're saying what are the biggest, where like when you're playing against an Alabama or a Clemson or one of these top tier teams, what are the biggest differences as far as talent level? I would think that you would say cornerback versus some of the wide receivers that they face. That's where kind of some of the gaps start to be created, right? So I need to see for Notre Dame to alleviate that gap, to eliminate that gap, is for some of the young players who are very talented really start to turn that to progress and that upside into tangible production. Like, you need to start to see it.
Yeah, I think that gap in corner play is twofold, Ryan. I think you nailed it with the whole, your corners are not to the level of Devontae Smith and John Mechie, and it wouldn't have been Jamison Williams last year. And if you looked at the Ohio State receivers, you're not on that level yet. It's also about the other corners, right? Your receivers are facing tougher tests. And so I think those are things where you look at and say, we talked about this being the show, is most teams that compete for championships have at least one high-level corner. But the difference between them, you and I both think Notre Dame can have a high-level corner. You and I both think Notre Dame has a chance to have one of the nation's best corners next year, correct? I mean, we're on the same page with Cam Hart. The difference is the number two doesn't have to be that guy, but the gap can't be as great as it is right now between their number one and their number two. That's, I think, where that level that there needs to be. And we saw it in 2019 as well. I thought Troy Pride was really good in 2019. The problem was the gap between Troy and then Sean Crawford and Tariq Bracey and those other guys was bigger than what it should have been for an elite team. And I think that's where you talk about like the multiple guys being starting caliber players. It's not about that you will start them, that they play like guys that you should start. There's a difference, because somebody's got to start. It doesn't mean he's any good, right? And so when Ryan talks about, comfortable starting guys, it's not just about, well, this guy can play that position. It's like, this guy needs to play that position. That's what we're referring to. And when they get to that point, that's when you start feeling like the cornerback room is getting there. Because as we said, like, we think, Ryan, I don't know if you were listening, because I know you texted me, you had like 3 different interviews you were working on, because Ryan is grinding, folks. Like, you don't understand how many updates he's put on the private board, the premium board recently. But the thing we said is, I think the D-line room is already a top 10 room. I think by the end of the season, the safety and linebacker rooms could be in that top 10 category. They have a chance to be in that top 10 category. I don't see a cornerback room being there yet. So it's about maximizing with what you have. You can say, hey, go out and get great 2023 corners, but those guys can't help you in 2022. You've got to make the most of what you have from this room. And that's going to be the challenge for Mike Mickens. And there's some players there.
Yeah. And I think that cornerback too, Brian, is such a confidence-driven position, right? Like, I did hear you before I got on talking about, when Troy was on, he was kind of saying like, you need a short-term memory. I want to leave spring and see some of these young guys have a little bit of swagger to themselves. Because, I mean, obviously cornerback, you want guys to have length, you want guys to have athleticism, obviously. Like, those are requisites. But like, we just saw Darian Kendrick today from Georgia. I don't know if you saw this update, but he ran 4.75 at their pro day today. Like, he is not a great athlete. He had like a 31-inch vert. But when you watch Darian Kendrick play at Georgia this past year, he was playing like nobody in front of him was going to beat him. And he plays with the swagger. We need that same emphasis because, again, there are talented players. Ryan Barnes can run a lot faster than Darian Kendrick. He is an athletic kid. He's longer than Darian Kendrick. Chance Tucker can run faster than Darian Kendrick.
Just to back that up, I've been told Ryan the last time they ran, which is a while ago, was a high 4.5. But people say, well, that's not real fast. That's what Julian Love ran when he was at Notre Dame.
And he's a sophomore 6'3" corner, right? So
right.
Yeah.
So no, that's not a burner, but that's not slow either. To Ryan's point, I mean, Darian Kendrick is a longer corner. He's not quite Cam Hart long or Ryan Barnes long, but he's a longer corner. Yep. And so yes, I did not hear that. That's a bad time.
4.75, 4.78, dude. It was,
and he was the star. I mean, so what you're saying is he ran the same 40 time as Jordan Davis.
That's what I'm saying. I'm saying maybe a couple fractions of 100th faster, but yes.
Well, two of those big D linemen definitely had same or better times. I mean that, but yet he was, like you said, he was a very good football player for them this year. So that again, playing fast and being fast aren't all, on track times aren't always the same thing. And as we've said, some of the best corners Notre Dame has had were not burners, Julian Love. But here's what Notre Dame did a great job of with Mike Elko and Clark Lee is they said, this is what Julian does well, and we're going to play to that strength. He's not a man guy. He's a great read and react. That's why in the NFL, they didn't move him to safety in the NFL because he's slow. They moved him to safety in the NFL because his game is better suited for a safety position where it's like keep everything in front of you type of role. He's not a flip your hips at the snap of the ball kind of guy. Once Julian has to flip his hips, you've now kind of got him out of where his game is ideally suited, which is why he had like 23 pass breakups in 2017, which is an absurd number, by the way.
Absurd.
Yeah. And that's kind of that's going to be where this staff is going to have to learn. Because again, last year was first year on staff for Marcus Freeman. It was, you kind of learning kind of what guys can and can't do. And so that makes obviously a big part of that. So we got a lot of recruiting stuff, Ryan, and we've had some people got some recruiting questions in before we even got here. Toe Jam with a super chat. Thank you so much, Toe Jam, for that. Sorry I'm late, and apologies for the off-topic question. Just want to make sure you all are clear. We are going to do these daily Q&As. There is no off-topic. As long as it's Notre Dame or college football related, there is no off-topic for these shows. So, but we appreciate that. We'll just get to them after this portion of the show that's more specific from a sort of a content standpoint. So sorry I'm late, and apologies for the off-topic question that you may have already answered. Did Cardinal Tate stay for day 2? Any impressions of the visit? And a great talk with Troy Pride last night. Thank you for that. Troy was supposed to be on for like 30 minutes, like 30, 45 minutes. He stayed for an hour and 47 minutes. And he loved it. Like he did such a great job. I enjoyed that very, very much. So I'm glad you did as well. So Ryan, let's talk about Cardinal Tate. We have an update on the premium board. Sean Davis obviously talked to Cardinal, and we've had 5 updates on Cardinal Tate on the message board since yesterday. Yeah. Just kind of a little bit of just kind of general impression. No, he did not stay for day 2. It's I believe they drove back this morning. I think I'm not sure. I have to ask Sean if they drove back last night.
To spend extra time with family, right? Was the whole premise of that? Yeah,
because I guess they're getting ready to go on a vacation or something along those lines. But just impressions of the visit, in kind of how we felt Notre Dame did on that visit.
Yeah. I mean, so from Sean's update, that again is on the premium message board. By all accounts, Notre Dame hit it out of the park. The quote was, I believe, they impressed him more than they thought they would, right? And that's talking about him and his mother. So they made big impressions on both of them while in campus. And obviously we've heard the last couple of days, there's been a lot of Ohio State out there, right? Ohio State's the clear leader. Ohio State's this. Look, folks, if you're going to go after a player like Cardinal Tate, there's going to be other players that you need to work against, right? And this was a huge opportunity. I think there's going to be continuously some things in the future potentially that could also, start to pull it into a different direction. But you're going to have to battle with Ohio State. This is not going to be an easy one for Cardinal Tate. But the point is that they had their opportunity to wow Cardinal Tate with this visit and his mother, and they did. They handled their business. They put themselves back in a very solid position. It's going to be a battle. They dropped the top 5. Notre Dame was one of the top 5, along with Ohio State and Georgia, Alabama, and whatever. But all I know is right now it seems like it's a Notre Dame-Ohio State battle by all accounts. And I think Notre Dame is firmly in it, and they did everything that they needed to on this trip to be into that conversation, in my opinion.
There's a lot of confidence in both sides that this went really well. And one of the intel pieces we put up last night, and if you're on the message board, you already know this. I'm going to keep saying that. is that there was a lot of ground to make up when Marcus Freeman was hired and when Chancey Stuckey was hired, because the previous head coach and the previous receivers coach just did a poor job in this one. And the good news is Notre Dame's known it for a while, and they've been working to fix it for a while. Tommy Rees has been very involved. Chancey Stuckey's done a phenomenal job, really not just connecting with Cardinal, but connecting with his mom, which is going to be very, very important. His mom's going to have a similar impact on his recruitment that Tyson Ford's mom had on his. It's just right now, his mom isn't necessarily pushing for Notre Dame. That was a big part of this visit, was getting mom to understand the opportunities that await her son at a place like Notre Dame compared to, Ohio State and some of those other places. And they feel like they did a great job there. I think the thing that Sean has been adamant about from day one is that if it comes down to Cardinal making the decision that he wants to make, Sean has always felt that he thought it'd be Notre Dame. I'm a little bit more skeptical of that than Sean is, but Sean also knows Cardinal better than I do. But he's been adamant about that. And so yesterday seems like it definitely put Notre Dame in a much better position than it had been. And the good news is, part of the reason I think it went well, Ryan, is the staff knew exactly what was needed. They knew exactly where they stood. They knew exactly why they were not in position that they needed to be in. And that's important. Self-awareness is an incredibly important thing to have when you're recruiting. Because if you don't know why you're trailing, then you can't do anything about it, Ryan.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely correct. I mean, there's two ways that it can go, right? If you're like, oh my God, Ohio State is pulled ahead, quote unquote, right? That's at least the perception there. You can either say, oh well, we can't compete with Ohio State, which is obviously a very pessimistic way of looking at it. Or you could say, now we know what we need to do. This is the challenge that's in front of us, and we need to tackle it, right? And by all accounts, again, Notre Dame hit it out of the park. Is it going to be enough? We'll see. But it's not like he has to make a decision tomorrow, right? There's still time to continue to make up the ground. But I think that this was a very positive step in this recruitment, to say the least.
And he is such an important recruit for Notre Dame. I mean, he's not a make or break the class type of guy, but he's an important recruit. Look, we could spin it and be like, no, they'll be just fine if they get this guy, and this guy, and it's still going to be a great class. And that's all kind of true. But when you have a 5-star kid in your backyard, and look, Chicago's Notre Dame's backyard, it'll always be Notre Dame's backyard. You can't lose another stud from Chicago to Ohio State. You just can't. I mean, you have to start winning these battles. And I think that Notre Dame did a phenomenal job yesterday. The key is going to be trying to get him back on campus. After he's going to have an early April visit to Ohio State. Ohio State is going to push hard for him to pull the trigger during that visit. Notre Dame has to know that going in. They have to do everything possible to get him to not do that. They did that last year with Dallin Hayden, if you remember. They were able to kind of say, hey, look, make sure you come back here before you do that. The problem is when Dallin Hayden visited, the running backs coach kind of blew it, but they were able to kind of hold off on making that commitment. I think if they can kind of say, Cardinal, make sure before you make a decision, come back for the blue gold game, right? You're not in a rush. Even if you want to pick Ohio State, just promise us you're going to come back for the blue gold game before you make an announcement, right? That's something that's got to be the message now. If you feel he's leaning that way, if you don't feel he's leaning that way, then don't put it in his ear to commit to Ohio State. It's about if you feel that's where it's going, right? But just hammer it. We got to get you back here before you do anything. You got to get you back here. You got to get you back here. Got to get you back here. And then that's the key, because by then the class is going to look a little bit different. Right. And that should create some positive vibes. But then it's just another chance for you to really show mom. And it gives you a good time frame to really say, okay, you guys have convinced Cardinal. Now you got to convince mama. That's going to be the big key for Notre Dame moving forward. And the good news is, Ryan, they know it and they can start to address it. And we also had a question from Salty Virginia Peanuts. Is Cardinal Tate and his mother having a day 2 on campus, or did they decide to go home? And just to make sure we iterate, they did, I believe. They're all either at home now or on their way home. But they wrapped up the visit yesterday. I don't know if they definitely stayed in town like they had planned to and see Notre Dame or see the campus a little bit more. But they definitely were involved in that. And They did some of that. I just don't know if they carried it over in today or not. I'll have to ask Sean on that one because he would have a better idea of that. Quinn Kibler, question for later. A buddy and I were chatting about quarterbacks to come out of the state of Michigan. Any other besides Cousins and Stanton? Crazy. We will see more Carr and Underwood coming up. Well, Drew Henson was one.
Drew Henson was one. I actually have one, and this is really weird that I actually did not Google this. This is just kind of a weird knowledge that I have. Earl Morrell was from Michigan. I remember
the guy talking about back in the day for the Colts.
From the Colts, yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Earl Morrell, and
that's
then
a super random.
He played with the Miami Dolphins too, I believe. After that as well, yes, he was. I think it was Earl. Oh, no, yeah. Earl Morrell definitely went to Michigan. I'm about to Google it just to make sure that I'm correct, but I believe he did grow up in Michigan.
That's very interesting.
There's your random fact of the day. Your random fact.
Yeah,
of the day.
very, very interesting. I'm actually looking up. I'm looking up now. Pro Football Sports Reference. Pro Football Reference has a thing where they have players to come out of certain states that are, I believe, currently in the NFL. And right now it's Cooper Rush and Drew Stanton and Jim Sorgi of current players that were born in Michigan. So
is Jim Sorgi still playing?
It's what it says. That's what it says. So yeah, very, very interesting. So, and obviously that's players that are from the state, not guys that played at Michigan or Michigan State. Some about people that are from the state of Michigan. So that's a very interesting take. I'm gonna actually kind of I'm gonna look that up. Now, Drew Henson's a guy that I have always felt if Drew Henson would have focused just on football. Right. I think he could. He's like Ronald Curry to me. I think he could have been really good. Mm-hmm. I think his baseball infatuation kind of hurt him a little bit. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I mean, especially at quarterback, right? Like you have to be locked in at all times, and when you're not, I mean, it's because he was really. Didn't Dallas take him in like the 4th round after he didn't even play the previous season? Right? It's just like obviously he was super talented.
Yeah, very, very talented player.
Yeah.
There's a couple other guys. Tyree Jackson played at Buffalo, was from the state of Michigan. I did not know that. Obviously, Drew Henson. Devin Gardner, who played at Michigan, was from the state of Michigan. He was okay. Wasn't a great quarterback. I'm just going through this one list from the last 25 years. Shane Morris was a guy with a big rep. He never ended up doing anything, but he was a guy that was
I forgot about Shane Morris.
Yeah, he was a big time. Michigan. Yeah, he wasn't that good, but he was a big time recruit for a while there. So just kind of going through this list. But now they're having Drew Stanton, we talked about already. Stephen Threet, he wasn't any good at Michigan. So yeah, those are some of those guys. Those are some of the guys that have come out of the state of Michigan. But yeah, that's an interesting question. But it's definitely getting better. Like there's no question about it. With Dante Moore, CJ Carr, and Bryce Underwood. And there's a couple others. There's a couple other quarterbacks. There's a kid that Dante Moore faced in the state championship that's going to Brown as a kind of skill guy. He's a really good high school quarterback. So it's definitely seems to be on the upswing. There's no question about it. Notre Dame 2164. Is anybody worried about the fact that Notre Dame has not had a good showing the last 3 years in a row in their opening game? I would say my response to that is I think you're always worried about openers, right? And I think everybody is because you don't really know, since there's no scrimmages in college football, you don't really know, like, are we this good or is our defense that bad or vice versa, that kind of thing. Or are we really this bad or are we just this good on both sides of the ball? There's all types of ways to look at it. But no, they have not been good. They played poorly against Florida State last year. They played poorly against Duke the year before that. And in 2019, I thought that they started off not great against Louisville, but I still say that the injury to Jafar Armstrong on the opener against Louisville hurt them. Because if you look at that first drive, when he touched the ball 3 or 4 times, they went right down the field and he was kind of a focal point of their game plan and they lost him like after a series. But, it wasn't a great performance and kind of a precursor of how that season was going to go. But Ohio State hasn't exactly lit the world on fire in openers in the last couple of years either. I mean,
well, that's what I was going to say. Did nobody watch the Minnesota game last year?
Like, if Ibrahim doesn't go down, they may lose that game. Like, they really might have lost that game. And then they lost a week later. They lost at home to Oregon. Mm-hmm. So their home opener last year, they got them. I mean, they lost by 7. Ryan, you watched that game. They were never going to win that game. Oregon outplayed them from start to finish. The year before they played Nebraska, I mean, that opener was in October. So, and if you remember that game, it ended up being 52-17. You go back and watch that game. It was a battle for the first half of the game. Like, it was a competitive game for a while. And then in 2019, they beat Florida Atlantic 45-21. But if you go back and watch that game, that was not a pretty game. They were just way more talented.
No.
So I would not exactly say Ohio State's lit the world on fire in openers either. I remember a year, was it 16, when they played Indiana in the opener, and Indiana gave them a game. They just were so much more talented. They were able to pull away. I think Braxton Miller had like a couple huge plays in the second half that kind of broke the game open. So I don't think a lot of teams play great in openers, at least if you're playing anybody good. So am I concerned about the opener? Yeah. Do I think that Notre Dame's problem is unique? Not really. I really don't. But yeah, I mean, I'm worried about the opener, but it's not because of what they've done in the past. And then to your point in the question, I think there's a response to it is it's a new staff, so we really don't have a clue. I mean, I could easily sit there and spin it and say it's a new staff. They're going to be better in openers. I have no idea, no clue if they're going to be better in openers. I hope they are, but I don't know.
I mean, it should at least be on the forefront of their mind that like we've gotten off to a couple slow starts here the last few years. Maybe we need to change preparation up a little bit, do something a little different. So at least there's a difference in how you're tackling the problem, right? So there might be a better result, or there might be the same. Who knows? But either way, I think that they're definitely self-aware of that fact.
Yeah. So you got to hope. And we'll kind of see how it goes. But right now, I'm just worried about getting through spring and being a better football team on April 23rd than you were on March 17th. That's the key for me. And now tomorrow's going to be a big day for Notre Dame for several reasons. Number one, obviously, they're starting spring practice on St. Patrick's Day, Ryan. But also, you guys are going to want to be locked in on Twitter tomorrow, starting early in the morning, because tomorrow Notre Dame is throwing out their pots of gold, right, which is their outreach to the rising junior class. And there's a lot of dudes on that list, Ryan, that are really talented football players. It's going to be fun to see that. And if you remember, the pots of gold for a lot of these kids are going to be offers. There are not a lot of 2024 offers. There's going to be a lot of 2024 offers going out tomorrow. If you remember, a year ago tomorrow was when Notre Dame offered, as part of the pot of gold thing on St. Patty's Day, that's when they officially offered through Dante Moore an offer. And it was then that we kind of were like, okay, let's look into this kid. This kid's really good. He really likes Notre Dame. So tomorrow's a big day. So you guys are going to stay locked into to our Twitter, to Notre Dame's Twitter, because there's going to be a lot going on. And, of course, the message board, because there's going to be a lot of names you've never heard of that you're going to start hearing a lot more about moving forward in the 2024 class. Yeah. Rob Osgood asks, do you think Golden will bring a more of an attack defense to pressure the quarterback to help the DBs? If so, how and who would you use to attack the quarterback? Well, Ryan, I'm going to toss this one up to you. Number one, Notre Dame was one of the 10 best sack teams in the country last year. I do think there's a need for them to be more consistent with their pressure, because sacks don't always mean you have a consistently good attacking defense. The front four, obviously. There's one player that Notre Dame's going to have this year that they didn't have last year that I think they're going to use to attack the quarterback, and I can't be the guy to talk about it because his biggest fan is sitting right there.
Oh man, I think. Right, so of course Brian's talking about Maris Loifau, who's coming back from injury, and I mean, apparently, to Brian's source, right? They thought that he was the best pass rusher on the team last spring before he got injured, right? So he's going to bring length and athleticism and closing speed that was absent. Like, let's just call it what it is. It was absent on the second level last year. The Notre Dame defense is going to get more athletic on the second level. The linebackers are going to be longer. They're going to be faster. And that is going to allow, I think, Rob, a lot more pressure packages, a lot more pressure situations. You can manufacture a lot more pressure than just bringing four on any given down, right? So I do think that Coach Golden is going to be a little more aggressive in the sense that I think he's going to bring some different pressure packages than maybe we've seen. I think he might bring a little more blitz variety. I think that there is going to be, but in order for him to do so, I think that we need to make this clear, right? This whole show is dedicated to the cornerback position. The cornerback position as a whole needs to be better in man coverage than they were a year ago. They need to be better in coverage, because in order to have those fancy blitz packages, you're going to be running most of the time a lot of man coverage, and you are going to have to be holed up on the back end. So it's not really a one-for-one, right? Like, you need both things to be able to coexist in that situation.
It's the premise of the question is, I think, a little bit flawed in that people say, you bring blitzes to protect the corners. No, the only way you can protect corners is you can get after it with a four-man rush, That's really the best way to protect, because then you can be in your base coverages. But if you're blitzing, you're going to have to play you're going to have to play kind of some man somewhere. Because again, we don't count 5-man pressures. That's not a blitz to me. A blitz is you're bringing more than they have to block. So you're bringing more than 5. It can be 6, it can be 7. But like a 5-man pressure with just a Mike stunt, that to me isn't a blitz. I count it as like a blitz for that Mike linebacker, but schematically, it's not really a blitz. Right? Just bringing the will off the edge to me is not a blitz. It's a part of what I mean is like you can still play zone, right? Now you can bring zone fires, but in zone fires, again, I don't necessarily count those as blitzes because you're still bringing 4 to 5. You're just dropping an end and doing those type of things. So if you're going to bring more than 5, to Ryan's point, you got to play man. And as we've seen with the best quarterbacks in the country, I don't care how good your blitz is. I'm going to catch and I'm going to get that ball out. And if your corner's if my guy's beating your corner, we're still going to complete the ball. Because if you go look at because Clark Lee tried to bring some pressures against Alabama, and they actually hit home a few times. At least got pressure sometimes, but he was able to get the ball out. Mac Jones was able to get the ball out quickly. A couple times he rolled out left and was able to hit guys on kind of crossers. But you got to be able to cover, because if you can't cover, then they're just going to catch it and just bang that one-on-one outside, or catch it and hit that quick throw if you're playing outside man coverage. If you're playing inside man coverage with single high safety, it's I'm catching and I'm throwing that outside go route, or I'm throwing that back shoulder. You still got to be able to cover when you pressure. So the only way to really protect the corners, and if they don't get better, the only way to protect them is if it puts a ton of pressure on your D-line. And now, luckily, Notre Dame has a D-line we think can be good enough to do that, but that's not always going to be the case. And we saw this in the Clemson game in 2018. Notre Dame's defensive line abused Clemson's front blockers. But you can't do it every snap. And I've said this before. Trevor Lawrence maybe only had about 4 or 5 clean pockets the whole game. But on 3 of those clean pockets, he hit bombs for touchdowns or big plays. And that's what happens when you play the best teams on the schedule. That's what's going to happen against Ohio State. You may pressure C.J. Stroud all day, but the 4 or 5 times he's got a clean pocket, they're going to have a shot to have big plays if your corners aren't covering, right? And that's the key. If your safeties aren't covering, is you've got to cover well. So then when you do get some clean pockets, he's still throwing incompletions because you're in good position from a cover standpoint. So that is still obviously a very big key. Timeout Tom asked, will there be daily video highlights in addition to scheduled spring practice media contact? I don't know the answer to that. So I honestly do not know if there will be. We'll have some video because we're going to have somebody at the practices taking video, so we'll be able to put some of that together. We'll have our own highlights. But again, this practice is going to be stretch in the first 5 periods, which means it's going to be stretch and one-on-one, individual mostly. So it's not going to be a super exciting. I'm just preparing you now. It's not going to be a super exciting highlight. Hopefully Notre Dame puts a video out. I doubt that they're going to put out what they used to put out, which it's kind of what they've done recently is like last year was like they'll put the highlights that are like the really up close highlights, so you can like see a guy catching it, but you don't really get a chance to see a whole lot else. But that's just the reality of it. Patrick Bird says, "Do you all see Mickey playing early?" I think Ryan, I would say I think he's got a chance. He'll get a chance to play early. How if he does or doesn't could have the older guys are going to have as much of a say in that as Jaden does, because he's going to battle. But if they raise their level of play, it's still going to be tough for him to get on the field.
I think it's a little tricky because obviously in the spring you'll see him a ton because there's going to be a lot of rotation and Cam Hart's not playing. But I think the problem is, Brian, and you correct me if I'm wrong, I would imagine Jaden Mickey's probably going to play to the field early, right? So in theory, that's going to be Cam Hart's spot when the regular season comes around, right? I don't know if they would make a switch. I don't know if he fits necessarily into the boundary. I don't know if he could work in the nickel. Like, I don't know what his outlook would be if he's not playing to the field where Cam Hart is. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. All right, let's get to the next question, kind of about the same topic. And this one I'll kind of kick to you, Ryan, because I think we're looking at we'll look at it from a college standpoint and then from an NFL standpoint. I'll answer the first part very briefly. Is Cam a top 5 to 10 corner? In college football, I think he's in the conversation. NFL draft, I'll leave that to Ryan. And the rest is, if no, when do you predict he becomes that guy? When he wins his breakout game of the season, I think Ohio State may try him early out of pride in their receivers, then realize the mistake. I think for me, he's in the conversation. I think you nailed it, Tommy. we're going to know if he's a top 10 cornerback in the opener. I mean, because Ohio State's not avoiding anybody with their receivers. Nobody. They're not going to be afraid of. And even though they lost 2 guys, trust me, they have a lot of confidence in the kid they have coming back, Jackson Smith and Jigba. They're not going to, if he's matched up against Cam Hart, they're not going to be afraid to throw it to him. And they're not going to be, they're young guys, Marvin Harrison, Emeka, all those guys. They're not going to be afraid to throw those guys. They're not going to shy away from anybody. We've seen that from Ohio State. So we're going to find out in the opener, Ryan, if Cam Hart's a top 5 to 10 college cornerback. And then also, after you kind of respond to that, I want to get your thoughts on whether or not, as you look at the 2023 draft board, kind of where Cam falls on that for you, but just on what we know now, not like if he has a breakout, but just if he just continues a normal trajectory of what a college kid does and doesn't have a breakout, where do you see him in that regard?
Yeah, I mean, I think his flashes are top 5 to 10 right now, right? As far as from a college football perspective, because I mean, a couple of those plays, man, like you just kind of like shake your head. It's like, yeah, just haven't seen that over the last couple of years, like it's different. And that length and that athleticism is potentially special outside. So I think that he definitely can be a top 5 to 10 corner in college football. As far as NFL draft goes, I mean, Brian can back me up on this. I've talked to him a few times before all the declarations happen. I'm like, is there any possibility Cam Hart comes out? Because he might get drafted in like the 3rd, 4th round type of conversation. Like he might be a top 100 player because he's 6, because you can't teach 6'2.5", and I imagine he's going to run somewhere in the 4.4s. Like that just strikes me as that type of profile.
We have been told he's one of their faster players. Now, I don't know how true that is, but we've been told he's one of their faster players, which surprised me. I didn't think he was that kind of runner. So, but you're right, Ryan. If he's 6'2" with those long arms and he runs in the 4.4s,
he's going top 100. It's just going to happen. So I mean, NFL draft wise, I think right now, as long as he has a similar season to what he had this year, you can pencil him into potentially being a top 100 type of football player. If he has a type of season that we think he can, because if the cornerback position on the other side of him gets better and they can't go away from Cam Hart and they can't just avoid throwing at him, and he has more opportunities to play the football because he's a former wide receiver, right? So there's natural ball skills there to a degree. So if he is able to have the production based upon the position just getting naturally stronger, I don't see why he can't be a top 50 player in next year's class. I don't see why not, because again, 6'2.5" with speed like that and long arms, like that it's not a typical thing. There's things that you call unteachables. You can't teach that young man being 6'2" with those vines for arms. So I think he has every opportunity to be a top 50 player. I think right now, top 100 player in next year's class, like I'm going to have him probably in some 2nd round mock drafts next year to start the year, because I think that he has that type of upside. Can he be a 1st round pick? I think it's also possible. But obviously, he has to have a great season, and they can't avoid him. And he has to have interceptions, and he has to have pass breaks, and he has to take his game to a next level. But I think the talent is certainly there for it.
I think to be a 1st round pick, he needs to do 3 things. Number 1, he needs to basically make it to where people just completely avoid him. Like that dominant where people avoid him. Number 2, when people do challenge him, because there will be some teams on that 2022 schedule that will go after him. Clemson's not going to avoid him. USC will not avoid him. And Ohio State will not avoid him. In those instances, he's got to step up and make a lot of plays. And then number 3, I think to be a 1st round pick, Ryan, and you correct me if you think I'm wrong on this, he's got to run fast. He can't have like a kind of a disappointing time like Kyle Hamilton had and still be a 1st round pick, in my opinion, unless the cornerback board is just not good. But even then, I still think then they just won't draft a corner in the 1st round, right? Like there's no guarantee you have to draft a corner in the 1st round. So to me, it's going to require those 3 things. Is he's going to have to run fast. And I'm running a 4.3. A 6'2" guy that runs a 4.5 flat is moving, right? I mean, that's the reality. So I'm not saying he's got to run like a 4.42 or anything like that, but he can't run a 4.59 either, in my opinion. Because what did Sauce run? Didn't Sauce run did he run like a 4.48 or something like that? Like that's
4.47. Yep.
Like that's moving for a 6'2" guy with super long arms. That's the thing is like, and I haven't read anyone that I respect that's like, gee, that 4.47 was questionable for Sauce. It's like, okay, a guy that long with that kind of speed, that's moving. Because Richard Sherman was a 4.6, but he was good because he was super long and instinctive, right?
And so ball skills, man.
Right. There you go.
Ball skills. That's it.
At one point in time on that Seattle defense, he was the small corner. Remember when they had Brandon Browner on the other side? Sherman was a small guy.
All 6'4", 225 pounds.
Ridiculous.
Crazy, man.
Ridiculous. Speaking of that, John Rich asked Ryan, I'll kick this one over to you.
Yep.
I think everybody knows my answer already, I think, and I'm curious to see if you and I are on the same page. What do you think is more important for cornerback? 4.3 to 4.4 speed, or a 4.4 to 4.5 guy with an extra 3-4 inches of length?
I mean, all things created equal, you're always go for the extra length, even if it sacrifices a little bit of speed. But I mean, there's a lot of context to this question, John, that like,
Right.
how do they use their length? What type of player are they?
Let's say all things being equal,
Yeah.
right? Similar production, similar level of impact. One guy's a 4.32. One guy is let's say 6 foot with 31 and a half inch arms. Is that about a normal range for a 6 foot guy? It's about right there.
Yeah.
And he runs a 4.35.
Okay.
Okay. And then the other guy is Cam Hart. Let's say Cam Hart, 6'2". He's going to have minimum 33 to 34 inch arms, right? Let's just say 33 to 33 and a half inch arms. Let's just say.
Okay. Yep.
And he runs a 4.55.
I'm taking Cam Hart in that situation.
Okay.
I know it's like significantly lower, but that length just makes up for so many different things.
Right.
And I mean, in that instance, again, the length also, it doesn't just improve your ability to have range on the back end, but also like you can play man-to-man. I mean, you can play press man coverage a lot more in theory because you have those long limbs at the line of scrimmage. So I think it opens up more possibilities with the more length you have. So I'm just, if all things are created equal, I'm always going to take a little bit of length, even if it's sacrificing a little bit of speed.
Right. Now, if it's the film is better for the fast guy, then that's always the thing is like, we have to create an all things being equal thing, because at the end of the day, if the 4.55 guy has significantly better film, it's an easy answer. If the 4.35 guy has better film, it's an easy answer. It's the guy with the better film, right? That's why I say like all things being equal, because at the end of the day, the good teams, and this is the key, the good teams are the teams that have the testing in the proper context. And I think in the measurables in the proper context. You'll never see the Patriots draft the kid from UConn in the second round. They may draft him in the 4th or 5th round if he falls, but they're never going to take a guy like that, or rarely will take a guy like that in the second round. Where the Raiders make a draft, it seemed like for decades they've blown draft picks on guys like that, right? You got to put it in the proper context of, okay, what does the film say? What are the interviews like? What do the people around him say? All that stuff goes into it. And unlike the movie Draft Day, which I enjoyed, those things usually don't happen over a 5-hour period, right? They happen over months, which is why scouts get paid.
Oh man, that movie is very realistic. I don't know what you're talking about.
It's a fun movie as long as you don't look for like, okay, this is how it really went down. Like, come on, it's just, it's just not happening that way. I can assure you, if the Jaguars would have passed on Trevor Lawrence last year, it would not have created a wave of like, I don't know what to do. Trevor's on the board. It was like, okay, I'm drafting Trevor Lawrence is what it would have been. So, but it was still a fun movie, right? Still a fun movie. John Rich asked, did you catch the BK and Dante photo? BK was absolutely played by that young man, both in the touchdown Jesus pose. I've had a couple people mention this to me. Like Dante got, he was basically, Kelly was like saying like this. Some people thought like, is he mocking touchdown Jesus? Like, no, it's just, Kelly's not that deep. Tommy Guns also asked about Cam Hart. A lot of corner questions about Cam. Can Cam be a shutdown corner, either locking guy down his guy in man or taking away at least a quarter or third of the field? Ryan, I'd argue he's already been that guy. He's already proven to be that guy.
I mean, the last like few games of the season were like 5 or 6 games. It was like nobody threw at Cam Hart. You're like, I mean, from an evaluation perspective, it's like you have to really have the all 22 because you got to see him at the line of scrimmage. You just got to see him in his pattern. You got to see him being able to turn and work vertically. Like you have to see that stuff because Tommy, like they just didn't throw at him. So I would agree, Brian. I think he's already erased, a quarter of the field to a third of the field naturally already. I again, let's hope the other cornerback spot takes a massive step forward where you can't just avoid Cam at all costs.
Right.
That's the big key.
And avoiding happens in 2 ways, so you understand. Avoiding 1 is we don't throw at him. Avoiding 2 is we're going to make sure our best players never matched up against him, or at least as few times as possible. And so that's a key. Like it's kind of funny when you look at some of his numbers. I'm like, really, the only teams that really challenged him last year, North Carolina went at him, and Cam had a sloppy game that game. Virginia had a couple completions on it, but like Stanford went 4-6 against him, completed 4 passes. This is according to Pro Football Focus for 7 yards. I mean, so it was like screens and short throws and things
why,
like that.
Why would you ever throw a screen at Cam Hart? I still don't understand that one. But that's just my opinion.
And that's the thing for me. That's the one area where I think his game needs to be the more consistent, footwork and all that. But he's got his tackling was really inconsistent last year. But when he wants to be, he is a force coming up against the run. But then he'll have that play against Virginia Tech where like he's got it read perfectly. He's about to blow the guy up, and then he kind of gets caught in between. Do I lay him out? Do I tackle? And then he ends up missing, and the guy runs for 30 yards. That's where the inexperience of being a transition from a receiver to a cornerback will hurt a kid. Cam doesn't miss that play next year. Now that he's got that kind of under his belt. And that's what made his season last year even more impressive was it was the first time he's ever really played the position in college. And he had a lot of success. And he gave up 335 yards last year in the whole season. Looking at the numbers, 119 of those came in the first 3 games.
It's crazy. I mean, you have the numbers in front of you, Brian. I'd be curious to see what was the USC game. I feel like Drake London, like they avoided Cam all over the place, man. Like they put Drake in the slot, they put him against Clarence. Like I did not see him against Cam at all.
3 of 4 for 45 yards, 17 after the catch, which I'm gonna have to remember what that one was. It was probably like a hitch route against off coverage. And he gave up a long of 21. I remember the long of 21, me asking myself, like, I don't think that was on Cam. If I remember correctly, but it was 3 of 4 for 45 yards. The next week against Virginia Tech or North Carolina, it was 4 of 4 for 51 yards. They caught 2 comebacks on him where he was playing off coverage. He didn't play those well. And then see here, Georgia Tech went 1 of 4 for 11 yards. Oklahoma State went 1 of 5 for 17 yards. Yeah. So, I mean, he just didn't get tested a ton, right? And if you go back and look at it, they threw at him 66 times last year, which is kind of a high number. But I remember kind of being annoyed by the numbers all year because I'm like, that's a screen against off. Like, to me, when you throw a screen, that's not throwing on a receiver. Like, I think that's a silly stat. When you're playing off coverage and they run a 3-yard hitch route, that's not me giving up a catch. That's literally defenses will call that a no cover zone. Like you're going to give up that route, right? And then you just rally and tackle it. So some of those numbers, that's what makes his numbers even more impressive because teams completed 48.5% of their passes against him, which is a really good number. And I would argue at least 8 or 9, maybe 10 of those were throws where Cam wasn't really in coverage.
Yeah,
in my opinion.
That's where the Pro Football Focus stuff gets really blurry for me because it's like, I mean, Brian, it reminds me of like you're in cover 4 and they throw like a little flat route out there, right? And you count that as a catch against someone. Like, no, that's what you wanted them to do. Like that's what you're giving up on that situation, Like it just doesn't make sense.
Yep. Here's a recruiting question from Ian Johnston. Ryan, this is for you. How does the 2023 corner recruiting look right now? Do we have anyone leaning our way? Obviously, Justin Rhett is committed to Notre Dame. I think you and I are both confident he will sign with Notre Dame when it's all said and done. He's very much a Notre Dame fit. But after that, Ryan gets a little bit dicey at this point.
I mean, this is the one that gets me a little nervous, to be honest. Like, this is the position because it's a big cycle for cornerback recruiting, for secondary recruiting, just in general. Because, I mean, we just talked a lot about Cam Hart. Cam Hart's probably entering his last season. I know he's got more eligibility, but, like, I imagine that it may be his final season, or at least there's the potential for it. So the cornerback needs to be, have some numbers in this class. And, I mean, Justin Rhett from Bishop Gorman is obviously in the class, very talented, potential top 100 type of player. But then if you ask me, Ian, like, who are they in lead for? Nobody right now, to be very honest with you. Like, I think they are going to make a strong push for Micah Tease out of Oklahoma, Booker T. Washington, who
Christian
I would
Gray's
say is
probably their top guy right now, too.
Christian Gray's probably their top guy on the board. I think they really like Micah Tease, and I would say Micah Tease they're probably second to Oklahoma right now for Micah Tease. Christian Gray likes Notre Dame, but I don't know if they're the leader for Christian Gray. Like, I feel it's got a little bit muddled over the last few weeks, last couple months. They like Braxton Myers out of Texas, who long cornerback. But, I mean, to answer your question, I don't think any of them are leaning their way right now. There's a lot of room that they need to make up for some of these. And I mean, this process needs to kind of play out a little bit because corner recruiting does not have me too confident right now.
Now, Notre Dame is a lot more confident in with where they stand with Christian Gray than Ryan and I are confident with where they stand with Christian Gray. That's the other thing. Is like they love Christian Gray. They think they're going to get him. We're not quite as optimistic. So they're going to have – I need to see them get him back on campus and see some positive vibes. Because right now, a lot of the momentum just from what we're hearing – and I don't care about crystal balls, and that's not what we're talking about, but just – the momentum we're hearing in conversations and our sources, it sounds like LSU and Ohio State are really, really doing a good job with him, which I'm not super high on Christian Gray, but the fact that Ohio State wants him as bad as they want him has me kind of second guessing my evaluation. You know, like Notre Dame loves him, Ohio State loves him, and LSU loves him. Now, LSU I can kind of take with a grain of salt because it's his former coach. You could say there's a bias there, that kind of thing. But Ohio State really wants this kid. Notre Dame really wants this kid. So I'm going to eventually kind of go back and say, okay, let's see some more film of him because he does a lot of great things. My question is just the speed. That's my only really question about him. He does a lot of really good things on film. I want to see what a speed looks like and a little bit more. So, but he does a lot of things really, really well. It reminds me a lot of Jaden Mickey in that regards, where I never thought Jaden was a burner either, but he just was really good. He was really sticky in coverage. He just was really physical. Like, and then he shows up and he's a little faster than I thought, you know, and I'm hoping that Christian Gray's that the way because he does a lot of really good things on film. He's really instinctive, really smart, makes a lot of plays on the football. He's got some, even though he's not tall, he's like 5'11". I love his length. I mean, he seems to like for a 5'11" guy, he seems to have well above average length for that size too. And so we'll just see if Notre Dame is right on this one or not. Zach Martin asks, is it recency bias or does it seem like there are more cleanup surgeries this offseason for starters, rotation guys than normal? It's not. It is. You are not off base. That was an intentional thing. Notre Dame has had some issues in the past of guys trying to play through shoulder injuries and just build it back up, and they were just not the same player. And so what Notre Dame decided this year was just some of these guys with these minor things, we want to clean it up and let them heal and let them get back and get to it. We'll see if that is the right decision or not. But I like the fact that they were convicted about it. I also like the fact that they did it immediately after the season, like in January, like early January, where a lot of these guys had surgeries around the same time. So we'll find out. I mean, anytime you'd make the decision to go in and cut a guy open and make a repair, there's always a risk. But, you know, I'd rather take that risk than let's see if he can play through it. And then he gets hurt in April and now he's out, you know, for the beginning of the season. So there's always that. And that's one of the tough decisions the medical people have to make. And why I've always felt as a coach, you leave that decision to the medical people at the end of the day. So, and obviously the player and his families. As a coach, you're like, hey, you know, I'm not going to give you advice on this. Number one, there's some liability there. You know, I mean, there's always that kind of risk, but that's where we're at. Facilitate, inform. Thoughts on Buckner's long ball ability and ability to hit receivers in stride. Ryan, I don't think his ability to hit receivers in stride has ever been a question. I think the only question about his deep, I mean, he throws a beautiful deep ball when he can throw it quickly. Our question with his ability to throw the deep ball is, can he throw the deep ball? Like he can, I mean, you go look at the throw he made to Cam Hart, to Kevin Austin. Didn't he make one early against Toledo like that as well? I believe I'd have to go back and look.
I believe so. You're talking about the Virginia Tech
games.
one, that Kevin, right? Virginia Tech.
Oh yeah,
was the one.
The Virginia Tech one. Yeah, where he just dropped that sucker on a dime. I think there was another game he threw one. And that same game, he threw a beautiful backside seam route to Avery Davis as well. The question I have about Tyler's deep ball is, can he muscle it? Because like on those throws, he hit his drop and it was gone. That's not always how it's going to be. You know, can he go through and come back and see as his secondary read that backside post is coming open and I got to throw that sucker out there a little bit? Those are the questions I have. But as far as being able to hit receivers in stride, he throws a beautiful deep ball in that regards. I need to see the power deep ball a little bit more. That's my bigger question for him, Ryan.
Yeah, and I think it may be something, Brian, because I know we talked about this before, and I'm hopeful that it is, that maybe it's just something that he hasn't been asked to do a ton, right? Like that's something where, I mean, we talked about the simplistic package that he was running last year that did not offer a ton of downfield opportunities, right? But I think you did see in the spurts of him throwing deep, like he has a live arm, in my opinion. I wouldn't say that it is elite arm strength or anything like that, but I do think that it's live. I think it's talented in the sense that he can make throws from varying angles and do all that type of stuff. And I think that he has a nice quick release. It's a little unorthodox, but like the ball gets there for the most part. So I'm hopeful for what Buckner can do as a long ball passer. And I think that he's shown flashes of it. You just obviously want to see that ability and those opportunities get expanded so we can really kind of get a test of like what he has in a full arsenal.
Mm-hmm. We have the same issue of evaluating him in high school because he was so quick with his decision-making in high school that he was throwing balls 45 yards and hitting guys in stride. He just gets it out so quickly. And that's the big thing for me. That is why I'm more optimistic about Tyler than it seems a lot of people in our chat are. I have been dying to have a quarterback with elite anticipation for years. Notre Dame has not had one for a long time. And I think Tyler has that. And that's the thing that separates, to me, the great quarterbacks from the good quarterbacks is that ability, is to just see it and anticipate it. And what was the big complaint I had about Ian Book? He needed to see it first before he could feel comfortable throwing it. Well, against Clemson and Ohio State and Alabama and Georgia, that's not going to work. You know what I mean? You gotta anticipate. I know what my guy's doing. I know what the defense is doing. I see this. I'm reading it. I know when I hit my drop, this ball is going out into this zone, and my guy's got to go get there and get it. And I think Tyler has that. I think Drew Pine has that to a degree as well. And I don't feel that previous quarterbacks had that. And I don't think Jack showed that as much last year, but that was a byproduct of that was his first year working with all those receivers in that system. If Jack would have come back this year, if he was able to, and he wasn't, you'd have seen that anticipation level improve, because I think he shows good anticipation, not elite anticipation, but good anticipation. And that's partly why his success was so much greater down the stretch. Like if you look at that ball to Lorenzo Styles, like he threw that ball really before Lorenzo was definitely open, but he knew it. As soon as he made his drop, he saw the safety. I'm hitting my drop, and I'm coming back to Lorenzo on the post route, right? Sure. He got much better about that down the stretch than he was early in the season, which is just a number one, being confident enough to go through your progressions with the line. And then number two, just being more on the same page with the receivers and confidence in the offense. And now that's going to help Tyler too, that he's now going into year two. This is going to be Tyler's second spring. This is going to be his second season. I think you'll see him start to make those jumps. Paul asked, there's been some news of a couple 2023 defensive backfield commits leaning or looking elsewhere. Who are those guys that Notre Dame is looking at to fill these possible decommitments? I think we need to pump the brakes big time on the premise of this question, okay? Number one, there's only two. It's not that they're leaning or looking elsewhere. Justin Rhett said from the day he committed, Notre Dame knew he was going to take other visits. He's been honest and upfront with Notre Dame from day one that he's going to take visits. That was part of the deal of it. I'll commit now if it's okay with me taking visits. And if Notre Dame wasn't okay with that, he wouldn't have committed. I'm okay with Notre Dame's decision here with a kid like him. Peyton Bowen's situation is a little bit different. We had said earlier, we're confident in Justin Rhett staying with Notre Dame. We have no doubts about that. As much as you can have no doubt in today's recruiting world, right? I mean, I would have never guessed Pete Werner was going to decommit and flip to Ohio State either. I mean, things happen, right? Peyton Bowen we're a little bit more concerned about. And right now, when you look at who are they filling to those replacements, obviously Malik Hartford from Ohio is a kid that they're looking at safety. Caleb Downs is the guy that they're looking at. But at some point in time, they're going to have to expand the board a little bit if they really think Peyton Bowen is going to flip. But right now, I think Notre Dame is still in position where they feel they still feel like they are the team to beat. So it's not time to panic yet, but there's work to be done there. And they've got to get him back on campus. He's supposed to be back. What is it, Ryan, for the Blue Gold game?
Yes.
For Peyton Bowen. That's going to be a big visit for him in Notre Dame. They're going to know that weekend if Peyton Bowen's the guy that they have to be prepared to replace, in my opinion.
Well, yeah, and I think right now it is actually encouraging that the safety board is not expanding yet, right? Because like you said, they are not anticipating that they're going to have to fill a void there. So I think that's a positive outlook right now. And I believe that, Notre Dame is confident in where they stand with Peyton Bowen. And I mean, it is a little unsettling because it's something where it hasn't just been on the forefront of like, hey, I'm going to take more visits. It's just kind of all of a sudden he's at Oklahoma and no one knew about it. It was just like,
right. That's
what's
concerning.
Going on there?
That's concerning.
Exactly.
And that's why we're not worried about Justin Rhett, because Justin Rhett has told Notre Dame from the beginning, I'm still going to take you had an article when he committed saying, look, he still plans on taking his visits. I mean, this was something we've known
months ago. Yeah, exactly.
Right. So, and the same with Keon Keeley. Keon's been upfront with Notre Dame for a while now. Hey, look, some places I want to go to. right? And
Mhm.
you get a little less concerned about those guys. There's always a threat that people are going to flip, but it's the guys that do things under the, kind of behind the scenes that you kind of get worried about, because those are the guys you're like, wait a minute, why are you sneaking? Like what, like, why don't you be honest with us about it?
And it's
Tommy
gonna,
Gunn.
sorry, I was
Go
just
ahead,
gonna say it's going to be big too for Notre Dame to do their best to keep Peyton, because I mean we always talk about a top 50 player, all that good stuff. There's also going to be, I mean, one, they're trying to tap into Texas more, right? Like that's been a
Right.
point of emphasis. He's obviously a guy right out of Denton Geyer, who's one of the better prospects coming out of Texas in 2023, better recruits. And also the safety turnover for next season is going to be a big on the roster, because at least DJ Brown, at least Houston Griffith, maybe Brandon Joseph is also going off of the safety board. So you need to replenish that safety depth chart, and keeping a guy like Peyton Bowen is going to be big. So
And if you think about it, Ramon Henderson and Xavier Watts will all be seniors when Peyton Bowen's a freshman. I mean, so you're looking at your first 2 years at Notre Dame. There's potentially a lot of turnover at that position. And that's how they can kind of say it to him. I mean, there's the COVID stuff and all that, but don't necessarily need to talk about that. David Solomon says best case scenario for the defensive backs coming out of the spring would be every starter from last year is in a real competition to keep their jobs, including Cam Hart. If Cam Hart, it's going to be hard for us to say that Cam Hart's going to be in competition to keep his job because he's not really practicing. I'll say this though. If Notre Dame, if someone challenges Cam Hart for a starting job, that would be a great thing for Notre Dame, because that means somebody is really good. Yes. But the odds are that guy would just move over. If somebody was really challenging Cam, the odds are one of those two is moving to the boundary and taking that job. But yes, David, I would say that's always true. When your best players are being pushed by other guys, that's a great situation to be in my opinion. Big Jim, crazier or Earl Mora fact. Cut one of his toes off in an off-season lawnmower accident, and somehow it actually helped him throw better spirals. I have no idea if that's true or not, but that's that's the stuff we used to hear about in like the 50s all the time, right? Like, do you know how Larry Bird had the back injury that really ultimately was kind of the thing that ended his career early? Do you know how he hurt that? He was like helping his mom, like I think it was like laying concrete at his mom's house. You know what I mean? Like doing yard work at his mom's house or something like that. Like you don't see modern day NBA players like doing. They was just joking. Like Larry Bird used to mow
French Lick, Indiana, right?
Yeah,
French Lick, Indiana. Yeah.
Larry Bird used to mow his own lawn. I don't even mow my own lawn anymore. NBA players that aren't doing that anymore. I don't think so. Timeout Tom said when Coach Mason did his initial interview, he mentioned something about coaching safeties. Is he going to have a role coaching DBs? No. He coached Rovers at Cincinnati. If he were to coach a position, that would probably be the one he would help with. But my understanding is, Ryan, he will be coaching the special teams and special teams only in his first season at Notre Dame. So I don't know if that's going to change. Now, the GA and the analyst roles could always kind of change the fact where he needs to do that. But I think right now his focus is going to be on special teams.
And that's pretty unique, right, Brian? That the special teams coordinator is strictly special teams at Notre Dame. Do I have that right? That you like typically they do coach a position, right? Or am I wrong there?
Who's that for the special teams guys?
Special teams coordinators.
Some do, some don't. Like Brian Polian didn't. Others do. I've mentioned a good buddy of mine's the special teams coordinator at Vanderbilt. He's always coached a position: running backs, receivers, DBs, whatever. And with what we've seen when they added the 10th coach, we've seen more teams have that guy coach a position or not coach a position, because it's like, look, we're just going to do it. I personally would rather have a special teams coach that also helps out somewhere else. Just that's me. But I don't think in year one that's what at least that's what we've heard that they're going to do. He's going to be the special teams coach. Now, again, that could change. It could go through spring, like, hey, can we get an extra set of eyes over here on defense? And the need to be standing around there working with kickers, you know what I mean? But we'll see if they do that or not. Michael Campbell says, I'm not seeing this Carnell Tate is being written as an official visit for Notre Dame on the recruiting platforms, as if him and his mom are just here walking around or passing by, not official. The reason that's being used that way, Michael, is because there's very specific, that word means something in recruiting. An official visit is not, it means something. It means the school is paying for him to be on that trip. They're paying for his travel. They're paying for his lodging. They're paying for his meals. And there's a certain time frame that he can be on campus, which is usually a 48-hour period. So if you arrive on a Friday afternoon, You got to leave by that Saturday or that Sunday at that same time. So the reason no one is saying it's an official visit is because official and unofficial are very specific terms of what that means. This was an unofficial visit. Anytime you visit outside of the official visit window, and right now the reason you can't bring them in on an official is because the window for official visits, I don't believe starts until June 1st, like that first week of June, I think is when it starts. So if they brought him in on an official visit, that would be a recruiting violation, and Notre Dame would no longer be able to recruit Carnell Tate. So that's a reason for it. Like, we can't flippantly, yes, he was officially on campus. Mike, we have official confirmation that he was on campus yesterday and that Notre Dame was with him and moving around. But we start throwing the word official on it, then we mislead people as to what type of visit this is, and it would make it an illegal visit, which it was not. So that's the reason that it's stated the way that it is stated by us and other recruiting services. David Solomon says, I think it's not. I think now it's too late. I want to be wrong, but landing Dante Moore will be the biggest thing Notre Dame can do to narrow the gap and make the difference. I think he's referring to Carnell Tate. So
right.
Here's the thing: they can't just rely on Dante Moore, getting Dante Moore as being okay. Now it's all fixed. They have to lay the groundwork of narrowing that gap before they make that other thing happen, right? I mean, that's the thing is he's not going to be a strong Ohio State. Notre Dame gets Dante Moore and bam, he's coming to Notre Dame. Carnell State's done. There's a lot of work needs to be done to make that happen. As we've said all along, we think that landing Dante greatly increases Notre Dame's chances, but they're not a pack. We've been very clear about this. They're not a package deal. They're not. Right. It helps, but they're not a package deal. Carnell ultimately is going to do what Carnell thinks is best for him and his family. And his family is going to guide him on what they think is best for him and them. But I think Dante helps that, but it doesn't ensure it. And that's the big key.
I think if they were able to land Dante Moore, then it could potentially push them over the top for Carnell Tate if things are on an equal plane or if it's trending in Notre Dame's direction. But you still have to put yourself in position to do that, right? Like, even if it's Ohio State up here and it's Notre Dame here and then they get Dante Moore, it probably closes the gap, but that doesn't mean that it takes you over the top. You still need to put the work in outside of Dante Moore potentially joining the class.
That is correct. All right. We got from Omar Austin. I believe as of right now, this is going to be our last question. Omar says, what are Brian and Ryan's wide receiver XYZ best 2023 combination? So if Notre Dame was going to have the ideal 3-man class, what is it going to look like? And I am 100% confident that, I'm 99.9% confident that Ryan and I are going to have the same answer on this one. So go ahead, Ryan, take her away.
Okay.
Now just XYZ, that's not that. So he's saying receiver. Just for clarification, Notre Dame's 3 receiver names are W, boundary, X, field outside, and Z. The Y at Notre Dame is actually the tight end. So I just want to make sure that's clear. But I think he's referring to the X, the Z, and the W. So, Ryan, with that in mind, please take it away.
Yep. All right. So we're going to say for the W position, which going into the boundary, thinking a big, longer type of run wide receiver. I'm going to say the ideal is Braylon James at the W. X, which is outside, obviously, to the field, like Brian just said. In Notre Dame system, I will say that is Carnell Tate ideally, and then the slots would be Rodney Gallagher, the wide receiver out of Pennsylvania. He's a guy that you just want to kind of create some ability to manufacture some space inside. So that would be my ideal class in those 3 spots.
So Braylon James in the boundary, correct? Carnell Tate at X, Rodney Gallagher in the Z. So that would be mine as well. I think if you miss on one of those guys, I think the next guy in line would be Jaden Greathouse, because I do think he can play X. I think he can play some Z. Think about Jaden Greathouse. I think he could play all 3 in some roles. I don't think he's a full-time boundary guy, but I think he can play all 3 of those. That's what, if you're going to say what's the ideal 4-man group, he would be part of that, because he can play. Like, Rodney's kind of a ZX. Braylon is an XW. Carnell's an X. Carnell and Jaden Greathouse, I think, can play all 3. Carnell can play all 3 all the time. I don't think Jaden's a full-time boundary guy. I don't think he has the speed to be a full-time boundary guy, but he can do some things there, and he can play the slot and kind of that work the middle of the field, and then he can play the X. I think he can do all 3. Carnell could be a dude at all 3, in my opinion, especially the 2 outside guys. In my opinion.
I think Jaden Greathouse long-term may be like an ideal big slot, man. Like, I think that he would be a fantastic player inside because I just think that he's just such a good route runner. He understands spacing. He can sit down against zone. Like, I just feel like he would be a fantastic player no matter where he ends up at that
And
spot.
I think he brings some value there as a blocker too. I mean, almost like what we saw from Chase Claypool when he played the slot in 2017. People remember he was the starting slot receiver at least half of the 2017 season. And there's some stuff you can do with the running back screens, the perimeter running back runs, where you're getting a bigger. I mean, he's already 6'2", 210, right? And he's a physical kid. I imagine by the time he's a sophomore, junior in college, he's going to be 220, 225. I mean, he's a guy that can bring some value. So Ryan, I agree. I think if he could only play one position, I think that slot could be the spot where you say he could probably do the most consistent damage as a player. We did have one that I missed, Ryan, and this is up your alley. This is an NFL draft question from Tommy Guns. Do you think any third-year players who can enter the draft next year will take part in the pro days like Avery Davis and Kyron Williams did last year?
All right, so it's a good question. So in this hypothetical, Tommy, so it would usually be obviously quarterback throwing to wide receivers. So in this situation, pass catchers, I should say, because tight ends can be included in that. We'll have Jack Cohn, obviously a part of the pro day. He will have Kevin Austin to throw to in theory. I do think that there could be a wide receiver or maybe Michael Mayer that may be a possibility. Maybe a Braden Lindsey is another guy running because it can't just be Kevin Austin running routes when they're running that. So I do think that there will definitely be somebody wide receiver wise that makes a ton of sense. Obviously, Kevin's going to have his quarterback, so you're not going to throw in another quarterback into the conversation. So it's usually a player that you need in that type of situation. So it's usually going to be a quarterback or wide receivers or maybe a running back that are added to the fold if you don't have those players. But fortunately for Notre Dame, they have Kyron Williams a part of the class at running back. They have Kevin Austin to be a pass catcher. They have a quarterback in Jack Cohn that's going through everything. So that's the only replaceable parts, really. So I do think that you can definitely add in maybe Michael Mayer goes out there and run routes. Maybe a wide receiver runs routes. But those are really the only players that I anticipate that could be a part of that pro day.
So really there's only three that would make sense and be eligible, and it's Chris Tyree at running back, it would be Michael Mayer at tight end, and it would be Braden Lindsey at receiver. Because Lorenzo Styles and Deion Colsey, I don't believe are eligible to do it, correct? Doesn't have to be someone who's going to be draft eligible next year, I believe.
Yeah, you have to be going into your third year. Yep.
It has the rule changed? Does it still count as a 15 as one of your 15 practices for those players?
I'm not sure about that. That's interesting.
Because I remember originally they had made that rule, and it was a stupid rule. So like you couldn't practice in one of the practices or something stupid like that. So
I hope that's not a rule anymore. That's really dumb.
NCAA had that. So the NFL kind of said, hey, but that's what they did originally. I don't know if there was pushback or not to that. I'm not quite sure how that worked. But those are the three I could see. The other thing to remember too is there's going to be former players trying to catch on rosters that will come to pro days too. So like, for example, Troy Pride mentioned last night a couple times that Dante Vaughn's going to be working out of the pro day because Dante's no longer with the Chargers. He's going to try to time and test and do all those kind of things. So you may see like a Chris Fink, somebody like that come back and work out. Those didn't he work out because that's what Chris Fink worked out last year with Ian Book, correct?
I think he may have, and I think he may have. And I was just also going to add that there may also be players from other schools that are going to be working out because sometimes schools will allow other players outside to. Like today, for instance, I was at the Villanova Pro Day. They had a kid from Indiana, University of Pennsylvania. They had a kid from Virginia Tech that had transferred from Villanova that played wide receiver. They had a kid from New Hampshire that's from around the area. So there are other schools typically that are a part of the pro days as long as they're allowed by the institution. So that
would be a Notre Dame decision. Right.
Exactly.
Notre Dame hasn't done that a ton. I think there was a quarterback one year, but you get into those weird situations. If you remember correctly, during one of the years since Tommy Rees has returned as a coach, he threw at a pro day. He had to throw at the pro day. He wasn't doing it to get noticed. He was doing it because they didn't have a quarterback to throw to the. I'm trying to remember. Was it Miles Boykin's pro day? Was it Equanimity St. Brown's? It was one of the earlier years when Tommy was on the staff where he had to throw.
How did Tommy look?
He looked good. I mean, he looked like he did when he was still playing. You know what I mean? Like quick release and accurate and all that. So he did a nice job. I don't know where he is now but this was shortly after he was like 2 years removed from playing at that point. 2-3 years removed from playing.
Hey man, he's only 29. I'm sure he can still get it going a little bit.
Well, it's like I remember being that age as a coach, and it's like I can still throw the way I did. It just hurts a lot more now, and I don't have as many bullets in the chamber, right? Or in the magazine. That's the that's the part where it can kind of get a little bit challenging. But I do like that rule. Now here's the question I have for you, Ryan. They allow testing now, right? Like I imagine they're going to be getting 40 times on like Chris Tyree and Braden Lindsey and some of those guys. How does that process work?
So that's something that they just started doing pretty recently as well. I think that it's like by request by NFL teams. So I think like Keaton Slovis, for instance, was a guy that USC was allowed to participate in the pro day on a more extensive level than just throwing the football for USC last year. And then obviously when they get into the junior day aspect of spring ball, right? Like there's going to be some Blesto scouts, so Blesto scouts always scout for the next draft cycle. They're not scouting for this draft cycle. So they would be looking at 2023 kids already. So they would be coming through and they would be evaluating players that are eligible for the next year's class. So that would be where they would get the heights, weights, maybe 40 times depending. Usually Notre Dame doesn't do 40 times and that type of testing for junior days, but they'll get the heights, weights, arm length, hand size, all that type of stuff. So there's it's good, man. I mean, there's a lot more ways now for players to get those verified measurables early. I mean, for teams and for organizations to get those verifieds early.
I somewhat understand why teams would be hesitant to allow guys to do that because you don't want a guy getting hurt running a 40 time if he's not training for the 40 and he's in the middle of spring ball. But I think for some of these guys, you might want to think twice about that because if I'm looking at a guy like Chris Tyree, it's like, and Braden Lindsey, like, I want to create some draft buzz for these guys and go let Chris Tyree run a low 4.3, go let Braden Lindsey run a high 4.3, create some draft buzz about them. But I also understand like, hey, we've got the GP. I think that helps teams too. Is like, hey, we don't want him to run because we're in the middle of spring ball and he's not trained to run that. But what we will give you is the GPS data. And I think that's something that can help you too, because there's a lot more. You're seeing more and more teams that I'm reading about, and again, this could just be smoke and mirrors, Ryan, but I'm reading more and more teams are putting more stock on the GPS numbers from teams than they are a 40 time. Mm-hmm. So that's something I'm curious about. And I have a combine proposal that I wanted to get your opinion on.
Okay.
I think that they should get away from the timed 40-yard dash. I don't think it really adds as much value. What I think they should do is they should have every player get in his stance and go from there. So a running back has to take a lead step and go, and then you time him from start to finish. A receiver should have to get in a receiver stance and go out of a stance. With a corner, have a cornerback stand there, take 3 pedal steps, turn and run, and test them that way. I think those are things that I think would be more practical that you could say like an offensive lineman. Don't have an offensive lineman get in a track stance. Have him get in a 3-point stance and come out of a football stance. I wish they would do things like that because I really feel like that would be better for the players. You can start focusing on, you're still working on your football stuff. And I think as an evaluator, it would give me a better sense of, like a running back getting in a track stance and running fast doesn't tell me how he's going to be in a 2-point stance, taking a lead step, taking a handoff, and then running. You know what I mean? So, put a ball in their hand. You know what I mean? Like a running back, put a ball in their hand, make them take a handoff, and then see how fast they go from start to finish on a handoff. That would be fun. I would love to see something. It's never going to happen, but that would be fun. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I was going to say it's never going to happen.
Never going to happen.
It's going to lose the media spectacle of the viewers, right? Like they want to see the
I think the opposite. I actually think that would create. I think fans would love that because it would almost have a gimmicky feel to it, even though it's actually more practical. Where because like 40 times, because it would give us a whole new data points to measure. Like, okay, it's like, and then all of a sudden your 10-yard start, your 20 starts becoming even more kind of impactful. You can do with running backs, you do 2 things. We're going to have you take a handoff on an inside zone track and go vertical. And then we're going to throw you a toss. I'm going to toss you a ball, going to have a cone on the edge. How quickly can you catch the toss, get around the cone and up vertical 40 yards? Right? Like, I think fans would eat that stuff up. And for a scout, man, that's like you talked about it yesterday. We're talking about burners. Burner's a guy that can outrun the edge. So if this guy takes 2.2 seconds or something, and this guy takes 1.9 seconds, like, you know what I mean? Like, I think those are more practical. And I think fans would eat that up. I don't think the NFL would ever even consider that. But
Well,
I think
it's
that'd be awesome.
all the scouts that I know and the evaluators that I know, they're all very old fashioned. So they would
Yep.
not, they
Never.
just want everything to stay the same. And
Never.
unfortunately, I'm actually very not terrified, but I am scared to a degree that the combine is going to continue to lose less and less steam here because
Right.
I mean, obviously we saw a few guys opt out of drills. The GPS tracking is a real thing, and you're absolutely correct. You are not wrong in that sense that a lot of teams are moving completely away from the 40s, the electronic times, because they can go to the GPS data and say, like, he got a max speed of 22.1, he was this speed out of a break, all that type of data, which is great. It's awesome because that is literally evaluating game speed, which is what it should all be about. But I really am scared that the combine is going to start to really lose its luster because people are just going to kind of be like, it's, guys, why are we testing? We don't need to test. Why do we need to test? It's going to put our guys in a bad situation.
The NFL is partly to blame for that because the stupid, silly things they did this year, the decision to cancel it a couple years ago was dumb. And I think the manner in which they cover it, to be honest with you, is kind of silly. And I think the other thing that hurts too is I feel like they are so off on their 40 times this year that it's like you lose credibility. I mean, when you have guys like, it's like, I get why they did it. I think they did it from the time that Tyquan Thornton ran the 4.21 to the time it became an official 4.28, you had a lot of clicks on, Twitter and all this other kind of stuff and people tuning in. And then it's like, oh, it's actually a 4.28, it wasn't actually, close to John Ross's 40 time. But I mean, they were so far off. I mean, it was like, you had mentioned this to me, like I've never seen them this far off consistently on guys. And then of course, the couple guys we wanted them to be off on, they weren't off on, you know what I mean? Like, please say that you were wrong on Kyle Hamilton and he actually ran a 4.54.
It was bizarre, man, because the first day they had such a quick trigger. Like all the times were a lot faster than they were. The next day they were a lot slower because I guess they were like, oh, it's bad. It's just,
right.
It's rough. Combine is not heading in the right direction.
Because didn't Charlie Cashley used to be the guy that did that for NFL Network? But he was always kind of close. I mean, it's an old Charlie's an old school scout. I mean, you know what I mean? Like he wears the suit and all that, but Charlie's, I mean, he knows what he's doing out there. And it was bad. But I think there's things that the NFL can do to make this event more fan friendly. I had no problem letting fans in the stands on that. I actually think if you do it right, that kind of creates some. I mean, again, there should be rules like there's no booing, you know what I mean? But like you want to cheer for a guy and that's fun. Plus, that allows us to kind of get in there and see it now, which we couldn't in the past, and just buy a ticket. They
have to make the event a lot more player and agent friendly if they want it to continue because pushing everything, the measurements, the bench press, and all the on-field stuff to the same day, you can't validate that is for the player. You just
what time were the players showing up on the weekday? Weren't they getting there like 8 o'clock in the morning?
No, Brian, it's way worse than that, man. I just talked to Leo Chanel from Wisconsin. They were waking up and they were getting their medicals and stuff 4 o'clock in the morning, and they weren't going to bed that night until like 1:30 in the morning.
Because they're doing other things. And then the running backs they were asking the running backs to do 40s and shuttles at like after 8 o'clock at night.
It's crazy, man.
Stupid. That's stupid. So if any agent worth his grain of salt is going to tell his dude, you're not running shuttles at 9:30 at night. No way. So I thought the agents did a great job this year looking out for their clients. And they actually, I thought, let some of their clients do more than they probably should have. But like, look, nobody's benching anymore. So find something else to do. Find something else that you can do. I also think the thing that they need to do a better job of is publicizing and showing the workouts. Like, I think that's something they should do a better job of too. But yeah, they're going to have to make it more fan friendly to make people watch it. Yeah. But it doesn't matter how fan friendly you make it. If it's not player and agent friendly, there's not going to be anybody there anymore.
Exactly.
And that's the big thing for me. So, and if you're going away from the 40 time, that's why I say, then find other things to do. Find other practical things to do. And that's why I say do more position specific times. You know what I mean? Like that, like those are the testing things that you can do. Like test linebackers, they got to step and run at a 45-degree angle, like they're running downhill or something like that. Do some of those things, like put them through some of these drills and test the drills or whatever. I mean, there's all types of stuff they can do. I think they need to do a better job of explaining to fans what some of those drills are for. That's the other thing. It's like they just do these drills. Like, why are they doing this drill? Like, not the testing drills, but like the workout drills. And I think those are things. The production overall from NFL Network kind of sucks, in my opinion, to be honest with you.
Yeah, you're not wrong. And I mean, even some of the drills they have, like the offensive lineman run through and stuff. I'm just like, how is this practical? Some of the things they do, like it just doesn't make any sense.
Right.
So
right. Yeah. And just like laying on the ground and then getting up. It's like that's such an old school thing. Like we don't need to see that, right? Like, whatever. It is what it is.
Can we answer this one real quick? Can we answer this one real quick? Tommy. Yes. Tommy Guns asked, when and why did 40 yards become the standard to measure speed? Tommy, a few years ago, I had no idea. And I actually found out a couple years ago. It was because originally the 40-yard dash was for a special teams aspect, right? Like covering punts. They want to see who could be the gunners. So you're going to run 40 yards because typically like 40 yards is kind of the threshold for punting. Obviously it's expanded now and it's like high 40s, 50s, but traditionally, at least when the measure was started, 40 yards was kind of the standard for punting. So they wanted to see a guy run in a straight line because the one place that it is applicable is if you're a gunner, right? You are running straight down the football field as fast as you can. So punts is actually why it is 40 yards as the standard.
Interesting. So now we definitely understand why guards and tackles and defensive tackles have to run down the field because they're going to be gunners on the punt team. Hey, way to go, NFL. Makes total sense. Whatever. A couple things real quick. I'm not going to even try to pronounce that. Something Galante. When is Notre Dame sending out the pots of gold for the 2024 guys? That's going to be all day tomorrow. They're going to be sending them out in batches all day. So it's going to be tomorrow. A couple other things here. Timeout, Tom. How many recruits can Dante Moore, if he commits to Notre Dame, bring with him whose names we're not familiar with at this time? It's not going to be those kind of guys. It's going to be guys that we're familiar with. It's going to be guys. Because here's the thing. This Notre Dame staff is going after the dudes. Right? Like, so it's like, well, what big time receivers are they going to go after now that they got Dante Moore if they get him? Well, they're already after those guys. It's Carnell Tate, it's Braylon James, it's Jaden Greathouse, it's Rodney Gallagher, it's Kyler Casper. It's those kind of guys that they're already on. So it's not going to be now maybe you could increase your chances with a Samson Okunlola or a Carnell Tate or a Deuce Robinson, but those are names already on the board. There won't be any new names that they go after now that they have Dante Moore if they get Dante. So I don't think that's going to impact. Corey D, real quick. Ryan, I'm just curious. We can be brief with this one. I'm just curious. I'll give my answer, but do you prefer the Notre Dame-Ohio State game being at noon or at night? It sounds like it will be at noon. I prefer a noon game. I hate night games when I'm on the road. I hate being because as a coach, you've got to get up, you have your breakfast, you have meetings, and then you've got hours before you head to the stadium of time you got to kill. Whereas when you're at home, you're at your apartment, you're at your dorm, you're maybe having lunch with your family, you've got your there's all type. It's road games at night suck, in my opinion, especially in an environment like Ohio State, which is going to be insane at 8:00 at night.
Well, that's what I was going to say, because you're talking from more of a practical approach as like a coach getting ready for a game.
Right.
As a fan of Notre Dame, I want that to be a day game. I want that to be a 12:00 kickoff because the fans will not be as big a factor as if it was at night.
Oh, yeah. And Ohio State hasn't exactly been great at noon games the last couple of years. They haven't been quite as good. Night games, they're hard to beat. They're hard to beat at night at home. Very hard to beat. I can assure you, Uptown Girl, this will not happen. But she says, they're Uptown Girl. I wonder if this actually is a lady or if somebody is still on the Christy Brinkley thing, because that was obviously the song that Billy Joel sang and Christy Brinkley, whose wife at the time, was in that video. Or it could just be someone who has the name Uptown Girl. Either way, great question. There needs to be an IB staff 40 race, take donations to the site to allow people to watch and place bets. That will never happen unless, as the boss, I determine that they're running and I'm not, and we can take bets that way. But I have a hard time. I don't think I'm going to be able. I could probably talk you and Vince into doing it. There's no way me and Sean are running 40-yard dashes. No way. I just pulled 3 muscles thinking about running a 40-yard dash. Okay, so that's not going to happen. Felix Fournier with a comment. Says better routes by the receiving core and better blocking. That alone will improve the passing game. Throw in Tyler Buckner's ceiling. Agree with you completely. And then the last one, Ryan, we're going to end with a draft question here. I believe this is the last one. I don't see any new ones. So, it is. I see. I nailed it. It's changed the name from Billy Joel from earlier. So I had a feeling that I was right on that one. Really leaning hard into the Christy Brinkley thing there, guys. But Ryan, Kenneth O'Donnell's an Eagles fan, and he says, Ryan, who should the Philadelphia Eagles draft in the first and second rounds? I would appreciate your excellent review. They have 2 first-round picks, correct? Or 3? 3?
They have 15, 16, and 19, if I remember.
Now, are they going to
correctly.
use them all, or are they trying to move up to get somebody?
No,
or
I
a little bit of both.
I think more likely they're going to trade one of them to move back, to be honest.
Okay.
So I think they're actually going to go reverse way. If they do sit there and they draft all 3 in the first round, I think they have a second round pick, if I remember correctly. Actually,
now, would that be a day of move back? Like, let's see how the board shapes up and then move back if it's not. Okay.
Yeah. I think that they'll kind of play the quarterback board because usually guys are trying to trade up into the top 10 for quarterbacks. But with this class, like there might not be a guy drafted until somewhere 10 to 20. So like they could possibly use one of those picks to move back. But to answer your question, Kenneth, I think so they just signed Hassan Reddick, who's a pass rusher out of Temple, right, for a few years ago. He's had double-digit sack season the last 2 years. But I still think the defensive end's in play because Brandon Graham's coming back from an Achilles injury. Derek Barnett's a free agent. All they have is Josh Sweat and Hassan Reddick. So I wouldn't count out on a guy like George Karlaftis from Purdue being a guy maybe at 15 that may be on the board. It's a potential good fit because outside of Darius Slay, Steven Nelson is a free agent. All they have is like Zach McPherson on the roster. So maybe get an Andrew Booth Jr. from Clemson as a player. And then I'm a fan of the Eagles maybe taking a wide receiver there in the first round too if they stick there because they have Devonta Smith, but they just have a bunch of kind of like secondary guys outside of they don't have a true like number 2 wide receiver. So maybe you draft a Drake London who would add size to your wide receiver like from USC. Maybe if Treylon Burks from Arkansas is there, someone in that ballpark, a guy that adds a little more size for the Philadelphia Eagles. And then after that, like always strengthening the offensive and defensive lines. There's talks that they may be in the conversation of getting rid of Fletcher Cox this offseason at defensive tackle. They have Javon Hargrave, who's a good player. They have Milton Williams, who they drafted in the 3rd round, but maybe 2nd round, you look at a defensive tackle guy to kind of bolster the interior.
They got to hit better at receiver than they have in recent seasons. And I think last year was a good start. I like Devontae Smith, but their last couple, Jalen Reagor especially, was not a.
They drafted J.J. Ortega-Whiteside over DK Metcalf, man.
In round 2, right? In round 2. That they have not done a phenomenal job drafting receivers. Although, again, good. Look, you can't blame the current administration, so to speak, for past regime failures, but it's been a problem. So good start last year. I like where you're going though, with that complementary type of player to Devontae Smith. You know, you look at the two bigger guys. You know, Drake London, Treylon Burks. You know, it's just, his 40 time still got me because I had to go back and watch his highlights again. I'm like, man, I just remember this guy being so. I mean, I don't remember him ever getting caught by anybody. You know, and you watch, wasn't like, didn't he take like a bubble screen against Bama and just house it, right? Wasn't it Bama that he did that against?
He had like 180 yards against Bama, man. Like they could not cover ball all day. It was crazy,
they couldn't cover him. It was insane. So that's the thing is like, you know, a guy like that. I mean, I've read a couple things. I mean, you know, who knows if these guys know what they're talking about or not, but where people are talking about him being like the number 1 receiver off the board, maybe going top 10 or 12. And then if that causes him to drop, a team like the Eagles has got to be like chomping at the bit to get to a guy like him. And I know that they've wanted to address their offensive line issues, obviously, for years. But now, Landon Dickerson, was he able to play last year?
He actually played pretty well. He settled into right guard.
So he was able to be healthy last year?
Yeah, him and Lane Johnson were playing pretty well down the stretch on the right side. They have Kelsey coming back. Left tackle, Mailata actually had a great year. Their biggest hole is they have Brandon Brooks, who was their starting right guard, who just retired. So they could use another guard. They might be okay with Siamalu for a year. But
Andre Dillard didn't pack out or work out.
He actually didn't do terrible last year filling in for Mailata, but now, man, he's not very good.
He's a freaking number 1 draft pick. You know, a guy like that shouldn't be filling in for anybody. That was
you drafted a swing tackle at number 23. That's what happened, man. That's what happened.
It's like, oh, what are you doing? The guy's never run block in his life. You know what I mean? Like he played for Mike Leach. It's like, come on. I'm obviously an exaggeration.
Well, but that makes it a tough one too, Ryan, because there's an offensive tackle coming out of Mississippi State where Mike Leach is now this year, Charles Cross, who's excellent, man. But it's like the same thing. It's like he doesn't run. He's never asked to run block, but like he's very good. He's very good.
He's a true junior, correct?
Redshirt sophomore, but
okay, but like in college, like me, so he didn't play as a freshman under the previous staff, right? See,
correct. Well,
he's only really played in the air raid, right?
Yes, he's only played in the air raid because he redshirted his first year. I don't think he played at all. Right. So
that's problematic. The Dickerson move last year, I thought, was either going to be like boom or bust, meaning the bust being like his knee never recovers. You just, you never know. But man, you get him at 37. If he doesn't tear his knee up in the SEC title game, he's not falling to 37. That was a bit of a savvy move, I felt.
He had really easy film, man. Like he is a very projectable player as a starter at the next level. It's just like, but he had literally not finished 4 out of 5 seasons due to injury.
Yeah.
Like that is
he had injury
unsettling.
problems. Yeah, that's right. He had those issues at Florida State as well. I forgot about that. About that. And his knee injury, from what I read, was pretty big. Like it wasn't just like a partial tear. It's like, didn't he tear multiple ligaments? So the fact that he came back last year and played, that's why I was asking, like, if he played, like, that's impressive because he tore that thing.
He stayed healthy.
He tore that in the SEC title game in December.
Yep.
Ooh, he gets hurt a lot, but he seems to come back from them and play well.
He bounces back. He bounces back.
Give him credit for that. Bit of a physical freak or medical freak, I guess, a little bit. He's probably like the new Mark Schlereth, right? Like, I mean, he would have like reconstructive knee surgery and be back in 3 weeks. You know what I mean?
Oh,
like
man,
guy was
Schlereth's
insane.
A weirdo, man. He's a weirdo.
Guy was insane.
Yes,
of course, part of, in my opinion, the greatest offensive line in the history of the NFL. I'm only a tad biased, and that would be the 1998 Denver Bronco offensive line. Although the 97 with Gary Zimmerman was pretty darn good too, So, but yeah, that was some pretty good offensive lines. Tom Nalen, Mark Schlereth at guard, did Brian Habib at guard.
Tom Nalen was so good, man. He was such an underrated
very
center.
underrated.
He was fantastic.
Yes, but that it was probably the 97 line was probably the best because you had Gary Zimmerman at left tackle. He was still a Pro Bowler. You had Tony Jones at right tackle, and then of course the next year they moved Tony to left tackle, and signed Harry Swain to replace Gary Zimmerman. So, but those were 2 pretty darn good offensive lines, and made Terrell Davis look really good. So, of course, having Terrell Davis and Shannon Sharp and Rod Smith and Ed McCaffrey and this guy at quarterback named Elway certainly helps.
It's not bad.
Certainly helps you a little bit. There's no doubt about that. So, hey, everybody, that's going to be it for today's show. Ryan, thanks for joining us, man. That was a lot of fun. Vince obviously was with us earlier. Thanks, everybody. Hey, remember, everybody, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share your podcast. I believe there are still Rocky Road Built Bars. I got 2 boxes of them. I will never, ever push a product on you guys in this format that I don't believe in. Some of the commercials I don't have any say over on the podcast side, but on the YouTube channel, I will never push a product that I haven't used, I don't like, and I wouldn't eat or use myself. The Built Bars are phenomenal. I cannot wait. I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about one. They sent me an ambassador pack the other day, Ryan. So like some of the new stuff they have, and there's a flavor that they sent me that's one of the puffs that I'm super excited about, but I'm not sure if I'm allowed to talk about it yet. So I as soon as they sell those, I'm going to buy like multiple boxes. So like they keep trying to test me on like, is cookie dough really your favorite? Because we got a couple other coming down the pike. So they are definitely trying to test me on that one. So if you use the promo code Irish Breakdown when you buy Built Bar, you get 10% off your entire purchase. Anytime you order, it's not a one-time thing like it is for the merch store. Sign up for the message board, everybody. $4.99 a month or $49.99 for a year. If you sign up for a month, you also get a 10% discount off your next full order, complete order from the Irish Breakdown merch store. If you sign up for an annual membership, and we've had a lot of annual membership signups the last few days, which I'm excited about, because that's when you're buying in. Hey, I'm in the offer a year. I love that. You get 20% off your next purchase to the Irish Breakdown merch store. And we've got cool flags like this, like that one right there behind that guy over there. Obviously, Irish Breakdown polo shirts, hoodies, all types of. His wife is a big fan of the blanket, so got Mrs. Roberts a blanket. She digs it. Got a onesie for Jules, which is obviously really those are adorable. I never would have thought in my life I would have sold those things, but we've actually sold a bunch of those. So all types of great stuff for the people that are part of the Irish Breakdown community and family, and that's what we are here. So sign up for the boards. Check out all the great content. I know Ryan was texting me before he came on. I got this update. I got that update. I'm going to throw this on the board. I'm going to throw that on the board. So he's already crushing it, folks, even faster than I thought he was going to crush it. And I'm not just saying that because he's on the show. I'm not going to say, I've said that to be nice, but you're really sucking. No, he's doing a great job, and he's just getting started. So really excited. Stay locked in tomorrow because we're going to have a ton of stuff on the first practice. It's the first day for the pot of gold. There's a ton going on tomorrow. Stay locked in. And, of course, tonight, Ryan, 8 o'clock. We're going to talk some receiver. We're going to talk some film. We're going to break down some film of the Notre Dame receiver targets. So definitely want to check that out tonight at 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern time. So for Ryan Roberts and Vince D'Addario, I am Brian Driscoll, and you all are what really make this thing work. Thank you all so much for joining us on the Irish Breakdown podcast.